Hello guys, welcome to Eclipse Wizardry. Today we have an incredible story for you. What if Hermione saved Harry from Dursleys age 6 and ancient magic merged their cores into unbreakable bond forever? If you enjoy the video, please like and subscribe. Let's get into it. Chapter 1. The girl who acted the summer Hermione Granger turned 6 was the summer she discovered that words, when you meant them badly enough, had weight. Not metaphorical weight. She already understood that from books, and she'd been reading proper books since she was 4, not the watered-down picture nonsense her classmates still carried around like trophies. She meant physical weight. The kind that made the kitchen window slam shut when her father reached to open it during a thunderstorm, though she'd said, "Don't," under her breath from across the room. The kind that made a library book slide off a high shelf and land open to exactly the page she needed. The kind that had made Tommy Perkins's shoelaces tie themselves together when he'd called her a swat for the 5th time in one afternoon, sending him sprawling across the classroom floor while Hermione looked with great concentration at the ceiling. She hadn't done it on purpose, none of it, and that was the part that kept her awake sometimes, lying in her neat bedroom with its 2 full bookshelves and the lamp she was technically supposed to have turned off an hour ago. She didn't choose for these things to happen. They happened when she felt something hard enough. Her parents, both dentists with an admirably practical approach to unusual events, had quietly agreed not to make a fuss about it. Her mother had hugged her very tightly after the Tommy Perkins incident and said, "Well, that explains quite a lot, actually." Her father had bought her 3 more books. This was, in the Granger household, the appropriate response to almost everything. So Hermione had spent the spring and early summer reading every mythology book she could find that mentioned unexplained phenomena, folk magic, elemental theory, old European superstition, and had arrived at the working conclusion that she was probably a witch, in the technical rather than pejorative sense, and that this was fine. Unusual, certainly. Fine. What she had not yet worked out was what to do about it. She was thinking about exactly this, sitting cross-legged on the wooden bench in Magnolia Park, 3 streets from her house on Heather Drive, with Extraordinary Accounts of Natural Anomalies, Volume 2 open in her lap, when she heard the sound. Not a dramatic sound. That was the thing about it that got under her skin first. It wasn't dramatic at all. It was small. A boy's voice, quiet and tired, saying, "I wasn't doing anything." She looked up. Across the park, near the iron gate at the Privet Drive entrance, a large woman in a mustard-yellow cardigan was pulling a small boy by the arm with the casual cruelty of someone who had done it many times before and expected to do it many times again. The boy was slight, very slight, Hermione thought, the kind of slight that meant more than just natural build, with dark hair that stuck up everywhere and round glasses sitting crooked on his nose. He couldn't have been much older than her. He was wearing clothes that were comically too large for him, a gray t-shirt that fell nearly to his knees, and he wasn't struggling against the woman's grip. He wasn't crying. He wasn't even looking up. That last part was what hit Hermione like a door swinging open in a wind. He wasn't looking up because he'd already stopped expecting things to get better. She recognized that in the particular angle of his shoulders, in the way he moved, not like a child being dragged, but like something being relocated. Like furniture. "You made a scene," the woman said, her voice carrying sharp and flat across the park, in front of the neighbors. "Again. I didn't mean to, you never mean to." She yanked him through the gate. "Get inside. No supper. Aunt Petunia, don't." The word was a wall. Final. Practiced. Hermione was on her feet before she'd made any conscious decision to stand. Her book hit the bench. She didn't notice. Something was happening in her chest, not panic, not quite anger, though there was anger in it, something older and more insistent than either, a kind of pulling sensation like a tide going out very fast, and the air around her felt different, charged, the way it did in the seconds before lightning. The grass near her feet had gone very still. Even the wind in the oak tree at the park center had stopped. She was 6 years old and she had no idea what she was doing. But she walked toward the gate anyway. "Excuse me," she said. Her voice came out steady. She was mildly surprised by this. The large woman, Aunt Petunia, the boy had called her, which meant she was family, and the thought made something in Hermione go white and cold, turned around with an expression that suggested small children addressing her unsolicited was somewhere between an inconvenience and an affront. "Run along," Petunia said, with the dismissive confidence of someone who had never once in her life considered that a 6-year-old girl might not comply. "You shouldn't pull him like that," Hermione said. "It hurts." The boy looked up. His eyes were green, and they were the most exhausted eyes Hermione had ever seen on a person, let alone a child. There was something else in them too, now, a kind of stunned bewilderment, like he was watching something happen that had no category in his experience. Someone was arguing on his behalf. He genuinely didn't know what to do with that. Petunia's nostrils went thin and sharp. "I beg your pardon." "You pulled his arm," Hermione said, with the same measured precision she used when correcting factual errors in class, which was often, and the angle was wrong for his shoulder joint. "It would have hurt. You shouldn't do it." "Who are you?" Petunia demanded. Behind her, from the enormous house on the corner, number 4, Hermione noted automatically, because she noted everything, a very large boy was watching from the doorstep with his mouth open. A man with a walrus mustache stood in the driveway, going a magnificent shade of purple. "Hermione Granger," Hermione said. "I live on Heather Drive." She looked past Petunia to the boy. "Are you all right?" He blinked. Yeah. You don't look all right." "Hermione, is it?" Petunia said, making her name sound like something she'd stepped in. "Run home to your mother before I call the police about a child wandering the neighborhood accosting people." "You're not going to call the police," Hermione said, with a calm certainty she couldn't entirely explain. "Because then you'd have to answer questions about why he looks like that." Silence. The man in the driveway, the uncle, presumably, had gone very still. The large boy on the step retreated slightly, as though he could sense something had changed in the atmosphere. And it had. Hermione could feel it, that pulling sensation stronger now, the air around her dense and thrumming, and she realized with a distant, academic shock that it wasn't just her. Something was radiating off the boy too. Something bright and ragged and enormous, compressed down to almost nothing, like a star being squeezed into a space too small for it. She'd never felt anything like it. It recognized her, or something in her recognized it, her magic, that unnamed, mostly uncontrolled force she'd been reading about all spring, reached, the way you'd reach for a hand in the dark. The boy flinched. His glasses flashed in the afternoon sun. He was staring at her now, and she thought, distantly, that he could feel it too. "You," Petunia started. "What's his name?" Hermione asked, because she needed to know, because it felt important that someone here treated him like a person with a name. The question seemed to confuse everyone, including the boy. His brow furrowed. "Harry," he said, before Petunia could redirect the conversation. "Harry Potter." Something rang through Hermione like a struck bell. She didn't know why. She had no framework for it. She'd never heard the name Harry Potter before, knew nothing of the wizarding world, nothing of prophecies or lightning bolt scars or the night 11 months before her birth when something had shattered against a child's forehead in a village in Godric's Hollow. She knew none of that. She only knew that when he said his name, the pulling sensation became a roar, and the oak tree in the park center shed every single leaf simultaneously, in dead, complete, impossible silence. Every adult present looked at the tree. In that moment, Hermione stepped past Petunia, took hold of Harry Potter's wrist, gently, properly, no wrong angles, and the world broke open. She didn't have a better word for it, then or later. It wasn't violent. It wasn't painful. It was like two rivers meeting, except rivers didn't have feelings, and this was all feeling. This was ancient and enormous and nothing like the small, manageable sparks she'd been quietly experiencing in library stacks and classrooms. Something in her core, that humming private center she'd been cataloging carefully in her notebook under the heading Anomalous Personal Phenomena, reached Harry's equivalent, that crushed, compressed, half-starved thing she'd felt radiating off him, and the two simply refused to separate. The sensation lasted perhaps 3 seconds. In those 3 seconds, every window on Privet Drive rattled in its frame. The Dursleys' car alarm went off. The street lights flickered on despite being late afternoon. The iron gate of Magnolia Park swung fully open and stayed there. And Harry Potter, for the first time in as long as he could remember, felt warm. Then it was over. Hermione was standing with Harry's wrist in her hand, breathing carefully. Harry was staring at their point of contact with an expression she didn't have words for yet. "What," said Vernon Dursley, from a very great distance, "was that?" Petunia had gone the color of old chalk. Hermione breathed in, breathed out. She looked at Harry. He looked at her. Something had changed in his eyes, the exhaustion was still there, and the wariness, and all those learned habits of smallness, but there was something else now too. Confusion. A fragile, terrified kind of wanting. "Come home with me," she said. It wasn't a question, and she didn't know why she said it. She said it the way she said things that were simply true. "He is home," Vernon snapped, recovering his volume if not his composure, and taking 3 heavy steps toward the gate. "Get your hands off my nephew, you little, don't." One word. Her word. The same weight as before, but more of it, much more of it, and Vernon Dursley stopped walking as surely as if he'd run into glass. He didn't know why he stopped. He would not have been able to explain it if asked. His feet simply declined to continue, and his voice, when he reached for it again, came out considerably quieter. "His things," Hermione said, to Petunia, still in that same calm tone. "Whatever belongs to him. Please get them." Petunia stared at her. "He's our ward." "You cannot just, his things," Hermione said again. "And I'd like to borrow your telephone to call my mother." What happened next was something Hermione would spend a long time puzzling over, because by any rational accounting it made no sense. Petunia Dursley, who had spent 5 years perfecting the systematic diminishment of one small boy, who had raised cruelty to the level of household management, who had never in her life been told what to do by a child and accepted it, went inside. She came back 4 minutes later with a small cardboard box containing 2 school exercise books, a broken toy soldier, a single photograph with curled edges, a young couple, laughing, the woman with wild dark red hair, and a toothbrush. That was everything. That was 5 years of Harry Potter. Hermione looked at the box. She looked at Harry, who was looking at the box with absolutely no expression, because he had learned not to have expressions when things hurt. She took the box in one arm, kept her other hand around his wrist, and said, "Thank you." Then she turned and walked back through the park toward Heather Drive with Harry Potter beside her, and didn't look back. Harry was quiet for almost 2 full minutes. Given that they were 6-year-olds and 2 minutes of silence was practically geological in scale, Hermione counted this as significant. "You didn't have to do that," he said finally. "I know. They'll probably, I don't know. Report something. I'm supposed to stay there." A pause, full of the particular heaviness of someone who's been told they are a burden so many times they've started to believe it comes with a legal obligation. "Professor Dumbledore put me there." This name meant nothing to Hermione, though it would very soon. "Who's Professor Dumbledore?" Harry shrugged with one shoulder, which she was already beginning to recognize as his version of "I don't know and I've learned not to ask." "Someone important, I think. My aunt doesn't like him. He left a letter when," a pause. "He adjusted his glasses. When I was a baby. He left me with them." Hermione considered this. "How long have you lived there?" "Since I was 1. That's 5 years. "Yeah. And in 5 years," she said, choosing her words with the precision of someone who has already understood the shape of something and knows that saying it plainly is the kindest approach. No one came to check. Harry looked at the pavement. Apparently not. They walked in silence for another half a street. "I'm 6, Hermione said. "I'll be 7 in September." "I'm 6 too. I'll be 7 in July." "So you're older." A flicker, barely anything, but it was there, at the corner of his mouth. "Older." "Yeah. Right," Hermione said. "So you clearly have more authority." He looked at her. The almost smile was confused now. "What?" "I'm saying that if anyone argues, you outrank me." It was a ridiculous thing to say, and she knew it, and she'd said it entirely on purpose, because she wanted to see what happened to his face when someone was deliberately, mildly absurd with him. What happened was this: the almost smile became an almost laugh, brief and startled, like a sound that escaped before he could catch it. He looked away immediately, embarrassed by it, but she'd seen it. She filed it carefully. Her mother was in the front garden deadheading roses when they came through the gate. Jean Granger was a tall woman with Hermione's exact shade of brown hair and the particular sharp attention of someone who had spent 20 years looking into people's mouths for problems that weren't immediately visible. She took one look at Harry Potter, the too large clothes, the thinness, the glasses, the precise careful blankness of his expression, and her face did something complicated and immediate. "Mum," Hermione said, "this is Harry. He lives on Privet Drive. Could he come in?" Jean looked at Hermione. Something passed between them, the look of a mother and daughter who have always understood each other with unusual efficiency, and then Jean said, perfectly normally, "Of course. Come in, Harry. I was just going to make tea." "I don't want to be any trouble," Harry said. The phrase came out automatic, rehearsed, the verbal equivalent of making yourself smaller. Jean said, without any excessive warmth, which would have been wrong, too much too fast, "Tea's not trouble. Come in." They sat at the kitchen table, Hermione and Harry on one side, her mother at the end, and Jean put biscuits on a plate and made proper tea and asked Harry about normal things, what school he went to and what he liked and whether he'd been to the park before. She was gathering information with the practiced subtlety of someone used to patients who don't volunteer symptoms, and Hermione watched Harry notice that she wasn't asking about the obvious things and relax, fractionally, by degrees. When her father came home at 5:30, Richard Granger, who approached all problems with enthusiastic competence and a readiness to acquire whatever book was necessary, Jean met him in the hallway and spoke to him in a low voice for approximately 90 seconds. Hermione, who had very good hearing, caught the words "marks and that box" and our Hermione did something. Richard came into the kitchen, looked at Harry with the same calm assessment his wife had used, and said, "Harry, Hermione's mentioned you." He had, technically, been told of Harry's existence 11 minutes ago, but this was a gracious lie, and Harry seemed to feel that someone having been told about him was a point in his favor. "She says you like football?" Harry blinked. He hadn't said anything of the sort. But something about Richard's easy assumption seemed to invite agreement, so Harry said, "Yeah. A bit." "Good man," Richard said, and poured himself a tea. "Hermione thinks it's barbaric. It has a questionable injury-to-entertainment ratio," Hermione said. "She has statistics," Richard told Harry, gravely. The corner of Harry's mouth did the almost smile again. Richard and Jean had a longer conversation with Harry after supper, which Harry ate with the focused, economical thoroughness of someone who had learned not to assume seconds, and it came out gradually, in the careful way that truths come out when you're not pushing: the cupboard under the stairs where he slept, the chores, the food withheld as punishment, the school uniform that was Dudley Dursley's cast-offs. Harry delivered all of this with a careful, practiced neutrality, as though reporting on someone else's life, and the Grangers listened without the kind of visible horror that would have made him feel like an exhibit. That night, after Harry had been installed in the spare bedroom with a pair of Richard's pajamas, enormous on him, but properly belonging to someone who had offered, which was different, Hermione sat on the end of her bed and opened her notebook to a fresh page. She wrote, "Something happened today. Something permanent. I don't think it was an accident." She thought about the 3 seconds when the world had opened. The pulling sensation, the warmth, the way their magic, she was sure now, fully sure, this was magic, had met and refused to unknit itself. She thought about the way she could still feel it, faintly, like a compass needle pointing. Harry was 2 rooms away. She could feel the direction of him. Not intrusively, not overwhelmingly, but as a constant low awareness, the way you're aware of a candle in a dark room without looking directly at it. She wrote, "I need more books." In the spare bedroom, Harry Potter lay on a mattress that was softer than any surface he'd ever slept on, wearing pajamas that were too big but clean, in a room with no spiders, and stared at the ceiling for a long time. He kept waiting to be told it was a mistake. He kept waiting for someone to come in and say he was supposed to go back, that there was a rule, that he was a burden after all and the rules still applied. The ceiling stayed still. The room stayed quiet. He pressed one hand to his sternum, where the warmth had started when the girl, Hermione, who had read him like a book and not been bothered by what she found, who had walked past an adult as though they weren't an obstacle and apparently meant it, where she'd taken his wrist, and the warmth hadn't left. It was still there. Small and steady. He didn't have a name for it yet. He only knew it was the first thing in his life that had happened to him rather than at him. He was asleep within 10 minutes, which was 4 times faster than usual. The next morning arrived with the particular violence of full summer sun and the smell of toast, and Hermione was already at the kitchen table with a new notebook and 3 library books from her parents' shelf, the closest things to relevant magical theory she'd been able to locate in under 15 minutes, when Harry came downstairs. He was still in the enormous pajamas and his hair was, if anything, more structurally impressive than the day before. He stopped in the kitchen doorway. "Morning," Hermione said, without looking up from her book. "Morning." He didn't move. "Toast is in the rack. There's juice on the table." He still didn't move, and she looked up. He was looking at the food with an expression she couldn't quite read, not greed, not hunger exactly, something more complicated. "Mum always makes too much," she said, which was almost true. "It'll just go cold." He sat down. He took a piece of toast. He ate it slowly this time, not with the rapid efficiency of last night, and she went back to her book and let him have the silence. Her father came down at 7:30, read the paper, asked Harry if he liked marmalade, and life proceeded around him the way life does in a house where people are fundamentally decent and not making a performance of it. By that afternoon, Jean Granger had made 3 phone calls. The first was to a family solicitor. The second was to a social welfare office. The third was to the local GP, whose receptionist she knew personally. By the end of the following week, a formal investigation had been opened into the care of one Harry James Potter, ward of the Dursley household, and the Grangers had begun the process of becoming his legal emergency foster carers pending further placement decisions. Harry was told about this over supper on a Tuesday, straightforwardly, by both Grangers together, in terms that made clear he was not being shuffled somewhere else but was being kept. At least for now. At least until things were sorted. He looked at the table for a long time. Then he said, "You don't have to." "We know," Jean said. I don't need," he stopped. Tried again. "I'm not a project." "No," Richard agreed, "you're a person who needed somewhere better, and we have somewhere better. That's all." Harry looked at Hermione, who had been eating her pasta and steadily not making it weird, in the way she did things when she knew that drawing attention to them would make them worse. "She brought me here," he said. "She brought you here," Richard confirmed, "and she has excellent judgment. For a 6-year-old. "I'm nearly 7, Hermione said. The almost smile was on Harry's face again, and this time it went all the way, briefly, before he looked back down at his pasta. But it had been there. It counted. Over the weeks that followed, late July bleeding into August, the summer long and gold and abundant in the way that good summers are when you're young enough to have nowhere to be, something was quietly rebuilt. Not dramatically. Not in any of the ways that stories usually use to show recovery, because real recovery doesn't look like montages. It looks like Harry Potter sleeping later and later each morning because he no longer had a time he was supposed to be awake to begin chores. It looks like the third week, when he left half a biscuit on his plate because he was full and could afford to be. It looks like Hermione noticing both of these things and writing them down in her notebook under the heading evidence and not telling him she'd done it. The bond between them, that permanent, irreversible intertwining that neither of them had chosen and both of them had needed, manifested in quiet ways that summer. If Harry had a nightmare, Hermione woke up 4 seconds before he cried out. If Hermione was deeply absorbed in a problem, working through it with the focused intensity that sometimes made her forget to eat, Harry would bring her a glass of water without being asked. Not because she'd told him she was thirsty. Because he knew. The compass needle sense she'd felt that first night worked both ways. Strange things happened around them when they were together, more than happened around either separately. Books rearranged. Gardens grew at startling speeds when they sat in them reading. Once, during an argument about whether dragons were biologically more plausible than people assumed, Hermione's position, or simply fictional and therefore plausibility wasn't the point, Harry, who had been pushed into the argument and was defending his position with more spirit than she'd yet seen from him, all the kitchen lights exploded simultaneously, leaving them in the evening dark, and then both of them started laughing, properly, helplessly, the way you laugh when something is too absurd to be frightening, and the lights came back on. Jean and Richard began keeping a discreet log of their own. One afternoon in mid-August, a letter arrived. Not through the mail slot. Through the window, which was closed, slipping through the glass as though glass were not a material obstacle but more of a suggestion. It landed on the kitchen table between Hermione's book and Harry's glass of juice, and they both stared at it. It was addressed, in emerald ink on thick parchment, to the children with merged cores, 2nd bedroom and 3rd bedroom, 14 Heather Drive, Surrey. "That's us," Harry said. "Yes." Hermione picked it up. There was no stamp. The seal on the back was purple wax with a symbol that looked like 2 overlapping flames. She opened it, because Harry made no move to, and read aloud, "To the young witch and wizard whose cores have undergone spontaneous unification in the Surrey region on or about July 1st of this year, this event has been registered by the Department of Mysteries as an anomaly of the 1st classification. You will be contacted regarding assessment at your earliest convenience. Please do not attempt to separate or suppress the bond. This is not possible and attempting it will cause distress to both parties. We are aware of the nature of the household from which one party has recently relocated. This matter has been referred to the relevant department. In the interim, please try not to explode anything important." There was no signature. Hermione read it twice. "The Department of Mysteries," she said. "The what?" "I don't know yet." She set the letter down. "But I'm going to find out." Harry looked at the letter, then at her. "Are you scared?" She considered the question with genuine seriousness. "No." "Are you?" He thought about it. He thought about Privet Drive, and the cupboard under the stairs, and 5 years of being told he was nothing. He thought about 3 seconds in a park when something enormous and warm had reached through him and decided to stay. He thought about a girl who had walked past an adult like they weren't an obstacle and apparently meant it. "No," he said. "Not right now." "Good," Hermione said. She picked up her notebook. "I have a lot of questions." "You always have a lot of questions. And I always find the answers." She looked at him. "We will this time too." It wasn't a promise, exactly. It was a statement of operational fact, delivered with the calm confidence of someone who has never yet encountered a problem that sufficient research and determination couldn't address. Harry, who had spent 5 years learning the shape of impossible things, found that he believed her. Outside, the summer continued, cold and long and patient. Two children sat at a kitchen table with a mysterious letter between them, and the magic in the air around them was warm and steady and decidedly not interested in being small. Somewhere in London, in a building that didn't appear on any map, in a department that officially answered no questions, someone was reading a report about an anomalous magical event in Surrey and underlining 3 words repeatedly: spontaneous, unification, irreversible. In the margins, they had written, "When was the last time this happened?" Below that, in different ink, a second hand had answered, "The founders. 4 of them. All at once." And below that, a third, "And look what they built." Chapter 2, The weight of what was taken. The man from the ministry arrived on a Wednesday. Hermione knew he was coming before the knock, the same way she'd started knowing things, not through any dramatic vision, but through a low hum of awareness, like pressure changing before rain. She'd been in the garden with Harry, the two of them flat on their backs in the grass with books propped on their chests, which was their preferred reading arrangement since Harry had pointed out that lying down distributed the weight better and Hermione had said that was actually correct biomechanically, and they'd been at it for 2 hours when she sat up and said, "Someone's coming." Harry lowered his book. He was working through a children's encyclopedia of world history that Richard had produced from a cardboard box in the loft, the kind of book given to children who asked too many questions, and he'd been reading it with the focused hunger of someone who'd been kept away from information for years. "Coming here?" "Yes." He sat up too, not urgently, but with the same attention he gave everything now, not tense, not frightened, but watchful. In the 6 weeks since Heather Drive had become his home, something in Harry Potter had quietly rearranged itself. He still had the reflexive economy of movement, the habit of not taking up space, but it was softening at the edges. He sat in chairs properly now. He ate without watching the clock. The knock came 4 minutes later. Jean got there first, as she usually did, and Hermione and Harry came in through the back door in time to see their mother in the hallway speaking to a man in a suit that didn't quite fit. He was somewhere in his 50s, with the face of someone who smiled professionally and the eyes of someone who filed things. He had a briefcase. He had a badge. He had the particular energy of a person accustomed to being let in. Mrs. Granger. Reginald Fitch, Department of Accidental Magic Reversal. He produced a card. Jean took it. "I'm here regarding a registered magical incident. A matter of some urgency, I'm afraid." "I received a letter," Jean said. "It mentioned an assessment." "Yes, well." Fitch cleared his throat. He'd noticed Hermione and Harry in the kitchen doorway, and his professional smile recalibrated. "It's actually the children I need to speak with. Standard procedure following a significant event. Nothing alarming." "They're 6, Jean said." "Nearly 7, Hermione said." Fitch looked at her. Something behind his eyes recalculated further. Jean stepped back from the door, which was permission to enter but not enthusiasm about it, and Fitch came into the sitting room with the air of someone accustomed to muggles moving aside for him. Richard had come downstairs by now. He'd been working from home, and had the slightly distracted look of someone pulled away from something important, and the 4 adults did the thing where they all arranged themselves in the sitting room and performed normalcy at each other while Fitch set his briefcase on the coffee table. Harry and Hermione sat on the small sofa. Their arms were touching. Neither moved away. Fitch opened the briefcase. Inside was a folder, a device that looked like a brass compass that had got ideas above its station, and a jar of something purple that he set aside with the air of someone hoping no one would ask about it. "Right," he said. "I'll be straightforward." "Please," Hermione said. He looked at her again. The recalculation was becoming a habit. What happened on July 1st of this year is, to put it plainly, not supposed to happen. Magical cores, the source of a witch or wizard's power, are individual. Fixed. They can be influenced, trained, damaged, in extreme cases broken, but they do not merge. He paused for emphasis. They haven't, in any recorded ministry case, in 400 years. Your letter said it's happened before, Hermione said. The founders. Fitch blinked. The professional composure developed a small crack. You read the letter. It was addressed to us. The second half of that letter wasn't meant. He stopped. Cleared his throat. Where did you get that information? It was written in the letter, Hermione said patiently. In the margins. Someone wrote that the last time it happened was the founders, all four of them, and then someone else wrote and look what they built. I assumed those were notes that weren't meant to be visible. Were they accurate? Fitch stared at her for a moment that stretched. Then he looked at Harry, as though hoping for a more manageable child. Harry looked back with calm, even attention and said nothing. They were, Fitch said finally, with the manner of someone making a decision he might later regret, broadly accurate. The theory, and it is theory, you understand, the records from that period are fragmentary, is that when Godric Gryffindor, Helga Hufflepuff, Rowena Ravenclaw, and Salazar Slytherin chose to found a school together, the intent was so singular and so powerful that it triggered a spontaneous unification event across all four of them. Their cores became, in part, shared. The castle they built responded to that. It's why Hogwarts has always been considered a living magical structure. The building itself is sustained by the merged residue of four founders' cores. Richard had his I am very interested in this information and am recording it carefully face on, which was his default expression at dental conferences and was just as useful here. And ours? Hermione asked. Yours is a bilateral unification. 2 cores rather than 4. Which is, we don't know, precisely. It's not comparable to any existing categorization. Fitch picked up the brass compass. I'm going to need to take a reading. What does the reading tell you? Harry asked. Fitch seemed slightly surprised that Harry spoke. It measures the depth of the integration. How far the cores have merged. And what would you do with that information? Harry said. Still calm. Still even. Not aggressive, but not accommodating either, and Hermione felt through the bond the particular clarity of his attention. He was watching Fitch the way you watched something before deciding whether it was safe. Fitch paused. We'd file it. For the record. For the record, Harry repeated. And to determine, Fitch added, with the careful precision of someone choosing words, whether intervention is warranted. What kind of intervention? Hermione asked. There are cases where, separation, she said. The word hit the room. Her parents exchanged a look. Harry went very still beside her, the stillness of something that has just identified a threat. Fitch held up both hands. I want to be very clear that no one is suggesting, your letter said separation is not possible, Hermione said. And that attempting it would cause distress. So intervention in the sense of separation is both inadvisable and impossible, which means the reading is to determine something else. What? There was a silence. Fitch set down the compass. He looked at the purple jar. He looked at the 2 children on the small sofa and did another kind of recalculation, the kind that involved abandoning a prepared script. Depth of integration, he said at last, determines whether the bond can be moderated. Certain ancient bonds, if caught early enough, can be shaped. Directed. The intent of the people involved can be redirected toward what the ministry finds useful, Hermione said. The silence this time was different in quality. Jean Granger said, in the polite but absolute tone she used when a patient was being difficult about flossing, I think this part of the conversation requires our solicitor. Fitch looked at her. He's available today, Jean added. I have his number right here. What followed was 45 minutes of the particular awkwardness that occurs when a bureaucrat runs into a prepared civilian. The solicitor, a brisk, competent woman named Patricia Hale who had been doing family law for 30 years and had the organized mind of someone who found impossible situations invigorating, arrived within 20 minutes and proceeded to ask Fitch 17 questions in rapid succession, most of which he was not prepared for. By the end, the situation was as follows: the ministry could not compel medical or magical intervention on minors without parental consent or a court order. The Grangers were not giving consent. A court order would require the ministry to explain, in a documented and legally discoverable format, exactly what they were proposing and why, which Fitch clearly had no instructions to do. The reading Fitch wanted to take required physical proximity to both children, within 3 feet, with the instrument, and both children had quietly relocated to the other side of the room during the solicitor's arrival and shown no inclination to return to within 3 feet of Reginald Fitch. Fitch left with less than he'd arrived with. He paused at the door. "I want you to understand," he said, and for the first time he sounded less like a ministry official and more like a person, though not necessarily a better one, that this isn't going away. What happened between these 2 children is significant. There are people above my department who have already been briefed. Professor Dumbledore has been informed. Professor Dumbledore, Harry said, left me in a house where I slept in a cupboard for 5 years. The statement was delivered with perfect neutrality. No heat in it. No bid for sympathy. Just a fact, offered the way you'd note that it was raining. Fitch looked at him for a long moment. Then he left. The 5 of them stood in the front hallway in silence until the car, a gray, nondescript vehicle that Hermione strongly suspected had a different appearance depending on who was looking at it, had disappeared. "Right," Richard said. "Tea. Biscuits," Jean added. "Strong ones," Patricia Hale said, and closed her briefcase. Later that evening, after the solicitor had left with promises to draft documentation establishing the Grangers as primary carers with full medical and educational decision-making authority, and after Richard had produced, from somewhere, a bottle of something amber that he and Jean drank 2 glasses of while discussing the conversation in low voices at the kitchen table, Hermione and Harry were in the back garden in the long summer dusk. It was the kind of evening that smelled like cut grass and roses and something electric, and the sky over Surrey was doing its best impression of something significant, all deep blue and purple at the edges. They were sitting on the garden wall, feet dangling. Hermione had her notebook. Harry had a stick he'd been turning over in his hands. He wasn't wrong, Harry said. About people above his department being interested. No, Hermione agreed. Dumbledore's going to come. Probably. Harry turned the stick. Are you worried? I'm thinking, she said, which for Hermione was a different thing. He's clearly very powerful. He's clearly been managing things. You, specifically, for a long time. She wrote something. But he doesn't know what happened between us. He knows something happened, but he doesn't know the depth of it. And he definitely doesn't know that I've been reading everything I can find. In the 5 weeks since the first mysterious letter, Hermione had expanded her reading program considerably. Richard had driven her to 4 different second-hand bookshops and she'd located, improbably, 2 books that turned out to be printed by wizarding publishers, one on the theory of magical cores, accidentally shelved in the esoteric section of a Brighton shop between a book about tarot and a ceramic owl, and one that was technically a fairy tale anthology but contained, within its chapter on ancient bonds, more genuinely useful information about what had happened between her and Harry than anything Fitch had offered. The bond, according to the fairy tale that wasn't quite fiction, was called a confluentia in the oldest magical literature. It was ancient magic of the most fundamental kind, not learned, not cast, not performed, but emergent. It arose when 2 magical beings of sufficient power and compatibility were brought into contact at a moment of extreme moral urgency, meaning a moment when one of them needed something that the other could provide, something their own isolated power could not sustain. The need had to be genuine. It couldn't be manufactured. And when it occurred, the 2 cores would do what rivers do, find their level together. The result was not that the 2 people shared power in a simple arithmetic way. It was more complicated and more extraordinary. Each core remained itself, but was informed by the other. Gaps in one were answered by the other. Weaknesses were shored. And in the very deep places, the places where a magical core touched a person's fundamental nature, their memories, their fears, their love, their intent, the two people would, over time, become partially legible to each other. Not telepathically. Not intrusively. But with the intimacy of two people who have read the same book and found the same lines underlined. Hermione hadn't told Harry all of this yet. She was still working out how to say it without it being strange. She was 6, nearly 7, and even with her unusual reading level and her excellent analytical framework, the vocabulary for our souls have decided to coexist was not something that came naturally. She was working on it. "What are you writing?" Harry asked. "A question list for Dumbledore," she said. "For when he comes." Harry looked at the notebook. "You're going to interrogate Dumbledore." "I'm going to ask questions," she said. "Which is what you do when you need information. He's supposed to be the most powerful wizard alive. That doesn't mean his answers don't need to be questioned." She wrote another line. "Power and honesty aren't the same thing." Harry was quiet for a moment. The stick in his hands had gone still. "My parents," he said. It was the first time he'd said "my parents" to her, in those exact words, though she'd known the photograph, the curly-haired woman with the wild laugh, the man with the glasses who looked like Harry but taller, was taken out most nights before he slept. "What about them?" she said, careful with it. "He knew them." Dumbledore. "He was, my aunt mentioned him, when she was angry, she'd say things like that old fool thinks he knows best and none of this would have happened if Dumbledore had." He stopped. She never finished it. "But he knew them. He put me with her after they died. He made that choice." "Yes. So he'll have reasons. He'll have explanations." Harry looked at the darkening garden. "He's good at explanations. I can tell. The type who has a reason for everything." Hermione stopped writing. She looked at him. This was the thing she'd noticed most in the weeks since July, the way Harry thought. She'd expected, given what he'd come from, to find gaps. She'd expected a child who'd been denied books and learning and space to think to have the intellectual equivalent of bare shelves. Instead she'd found someone who had been thinking, quietly and privately and with nobody watching, for years. Someone who had been reading the people around him with the intensity of a person who'd needed that skill to survive, and who had developed, without any formal framework, an extraordinary ability to read a situation correctly. He'd identified Fitch before the man had said 10 words. "He's here to take something," Harry had said, under his breath, when Fitch was still doing his professional smile in the hallway. "Yes," Hermione said, "he'll have reasons. We'll listen to the reasons and then we'll decide what we think about them. Not just accept them. Definitely not just accept them." He looked at her. In the blue dusk, the lightning bolt scar on his forehead was barely visible, just a slightly different texture in the skin. She'd asked about it once, early on, with the straightforward curiosity she applied to most things, and Harry had said he didn't know, which was true, and she'd said "I'll find out," which was also true. She had, in fact, found out. It was in the fairy tale book, in the same chapter about the confluentia, in a section on magical marking. The scar was not an ordinary wound. It was a residual, the physical trace of an extremely powerful magical encounter, specifically, a rebounding curse. The book's language was old and elliptical, but the meaning was clear enough. Something had tried to kill Harry Potter as an infant and had failed, and the failure had not been clean. It had left a mark. On him, and on whatever had failed to kill him. She hadn't told Harry this yet either. She was adding it to the list. He deserved to know. Everything, all of it, who his parents were, what had happened to them, what he was, what the scar meant, what had happened in that park on the 1st of July. He deserved to know all of it, and she was going to tell him, all of it, when she had enough information to tell it properly. when she could answer the questions he would ask. She was nearly 7 and she was already constitutionally incapable of delivering incomplete reports. Albus Dumbledore came on a Saturday. He arrived as simply as the other letter had, no car, no warning, just the gate at the end of the drive swinging open at 10 in the morning while Hermione and Harry were in the sitting room. Hermione looked up from her book. Harry looked up from his encyclopedia. Through the front window they could see a tall, white-haired man in what appeared to be perfectly normal clothes, a pale grey summer suit, walking up the drive with a silver half-moon on his glasses catching the light. He looked, in every respect, like someone's kind grandfather. He looked like wisdom made comfortable. He looked like a person who had spent so long being trustworthy that trustworthiness had become his primary feature. Hermione picked up her notebook. Harry straightened. Jean answered the door, and Dumbledore offered his name and a pleasant request to speak with the children. Jean said she'd stay in the room, which Dumbledore agreed to with the easy acquiescence of someone who had never needed to argue for access, and within 5 minutes they were all in the sitting room, Jean at one end, Dumbledore in the armchair, and Harry and Hermione on the small sofa where they'd been for Fitch's visit. Dumbledore looked at them both with blue eyes that were, Hermione noted, doing a great deal of quiet assessment behind the grandfatherly warmth. He was reading them the way intelligent people read rooms. She revised her estimate of him upward and made a note. Harry, Dumbledore said. His voice was warm and measured. I've wanted to speak with you for some time. You knew where I lived, Harry said. Pleasant. Factual. A pause, so brief it was almost nothing. Yes. 4 or 5 years. Yes. Why didn't you come sooner? Dumbledore looked at Harry with the particular expression of someone who has prepared answers and is finding their applicability unexpectedly limited. I believed, he said, slowly, that the circumstances, while not ideal, were manageable. I underestimated some aspects of the situation. You left him in a cupboard, Hermione said, looking up from her notebook. Jean, in the armchair, made no sound. Dumbledore looked at Hermione. Something in his expression shifted, not discomfort, not quite, but the adjustment of a man encountering a variable he hadn't fully weighted. You are Miss Granger. Yes. She had her pen out. I have some questions. I would expect nothing less. The warmth in his voice was genuine, she thought. He wasn't performing it entirely, but it was also strategic. He was using it as insulation. But perhaps I might first, Harry's parents, she said. James and Lily Potter. How did they die? Silence. Hermione, Jean said. He came here to manage information, Hermione said, not unkindly, but plainly. Which means he'll give Harry a version of the story that serves his purposes. I'd like the true version. And Harry deserves to hear it. Dumbledore looked at her for a long time. Then he looked at Harry. Harry was watching him with that clear, patient attention, not hostile, not eager, just attentive, the green eyes behind the glasses giving nothing away. Yes, Dumbledore said finally, and whatever particular approach he'd planned for this conversation, he seemed to have set it aside, which told Hermione a great deal about how intelligent he was. He knew when a script had stopped working. Yes, you're right. He does. He told Harry about his parents. He told him about Voldemort. The name made Jean's expression tighten and made something in Hermione go very still and sharp, and about the war, and about Godric's Hollow, and about the night of October 31st, 7 years ago, when James Potter had died in the downstairs hallway and Lily Potter had died in the nursery, placing herself between a monster and her son, and the curse meant for Harry had rebounded off something Dumbledore called love, and Hermione noted that he used the word with absolute conviction, and also that it was the true word, and Voldemort had been, if not destroyed, unmade. Harry listened to all of this without expression. Hermione sat beside him and kept her arm against his and felt through the bond the things that weren't on his face, the enormous weight of it, the grief for people he couldn't remember but had been missing his whole life without knowing their names, the strange hard-to-name feeling of finding out that your parents chose you, that they put themselves between you and a monster and won. When Dumbledore finished, the sitting room was very quiet. "The scar," Harry said. "A remnant of the curse's power. It bound a piece of Voldemort to you, not permanently, not irreversibly, but in a way that will require addressing when the time comes." "He's not gone," Harry said. "No. Diminished. Scattered. But not gone. And he'll try again. In time, yes. Which is why," Dumbledore paused. "Your safety, Harry, has always been my primary concern." "The wards on Privet Drive were based on family blood," Harry said. "My mother's family. My aunt." Dumbledore looked at him. "You knew this?" "Hermione worked it out." Harry glanced at her. "From the books." Dumbledore looked at Hermione. She looked back. "The theory of blood anchor wards is in the standard literature on protective magic," she said. "It wasn't difficult once I understood the basic principles." "She's been reading magical theory," Jean said, from her end of the sofa, with the careful equanimity of a mother who had decided to simply incorporate the fact that her daughter was apparently reading graduate-level magical literature into her model of the world. "So I see." Dumbledore's voice held something that might have been reluctant approval. "Miss Granger, the wards on Privet Drive exist in part to protect Harry from precisely the kind of event that occurred on the 1st of July. The bond? We don't know what Voldemort's remnant might do with such a connection. It represents a vulnerability, or a strength," Hermione said. "Depending on how it develops. And it's irreversible, so the question of whether you think it's a vulnerability is somewhat beside the point. What matters is what we do with it." Dumbledore studied her with an expression she couldn't entirely read, respect and concern, she thought, and something that might have been wariness, which she found interesting. She'd expected him to try to manage them. She hadn't expected him to reassess mid-conversation. "There will be people," Dumbledore said carefully, "who view this bond with considerable interest. Not all of them benign." "We know," Harry said. "Fitch was here. And you sent him away without his reading." "My parents did," Harry said. "With our solicitor." Dumbledore looked at Jean. Jean met his look with the pleasant implacability of a woman who had decided that her family's autonomy was not a negotiating position. "I would like," Dumbledore said, shifting approaches for the third time, "to explain something about the nature of what has happened between you. With your permission." "We'd appreciate it," Hermione said. "Though I should say, we've already found the term confluentia in the historical sources and we know the basic mechanism." The silence this time was a different quality entirely. Dumbledore leaned back in his chair and looked at two 6-year-olds on a sofa and said, "Where, precisely, did you find that term?" "A book from a Brighton second-hand shop," Hermione said. "Children's Fairy Tales of the Northern Traditions, 3rd edition, Chapter 9. The publisher's mark is in an archaic script but I believe it's flourish and blots, 1923. Your expression suggests I'm correct." "You are." Dumbledore was quiet for a moment. When he spoke again, the register had changed, the grandfather warmth was still there, but something more direct was in it now, something she thought might be the way he spoke when he stopped performing and started talking. "You are both quite extraordinary. Separately, I believe you would have been remarkable. Together, I don't think the world has words for it yet." "We'll make some," Harry said. She looked at him. He was watching Dumbledore with that clear attention, and there was something in his voice, not arrogance, nothing like arrogance, but a simple, grounded certainty, that she hadn't heard from him before. He'd found something to stand on. Dumbledore looked at Harry. He smiled, and this time the smile had the complicated texture of something genuine and something sad existing in the same expression. "I believe you will." He left an hour later with considerably less than he'd come with, in terms of information extracted, and considerably more to think about, which Hermione thought was the correct outcome. He'd told them about Hogwarts, that letters would come when they were 11, that there was a school, that it was where they were always going to end up. He'd told them that the wizarding world was larger and stranger and more real than either of them had yet understood. He'd told Harry, quietly, at the door, that his parents had been brave and good and had loved him very much, and that was not a management tactic, that was just a true thing that needed to be said, and Harry had listened to it with the careful attention of someone memorizing something important. After he'd gone, Hermione and Harry sat in the garden until supper. The afternoon was hot and slow. They didn't talk for a long time. For years, Harry said, eventually. Until Hogwarts. For years until we have access to a proper library. Hermione laughed, and Harry, after a moment, laughed too, and the garden was full of it, real and sudden and bright. We're going to need better books, she said. I'll tell Richard. He'll go to every second-hand shop in the south of England. He'll enjoy it. She looked at the sky. Harry. She'd been working up to this. There's more I've found out. About the scar. About what Dumbledore called the remnant. I think the proper word is Horcrux. There's a theory in the magical theory book. It's dark, but it explains the scar and it explains why. Tell me, Harry said. Not will it be bad? Not should I brace myself? Just, tell me. He wanted to know, all of it, completely. She told him. About the Horcrux theory, the deliberate sundering of a soul, the anchoring of a fragment to an object or a living thing, the reason a killing curse might rebound off a child in Godric's Hollow and leave not just a scar but a piece of the man who cast it. She told him what she thought it meant, carefully, acknowledging the places where she wasn't certain. He listened the way he listened to everything, without flinching. When she finished, he was quiet. Then he said, so there's a piece of him in my head. Possibly. The theory is imprecise about exactly where a fragment lodges. Can it be removed? I don't know yet. I'm working on it. He nodded. Then, Hermione. Yes? Thank you. For, not deciding I shouldn't know. She frowned. Why wouldn't you know? It's your head. Dumbledore didn't tell me. Dumbledore has a different set of priorities than we do. She picked up her notebook. We have the same set of priorities. That's different. He looked at her in the late afternoon light, and the almost smile was on his face, and it stayed there longer than usual. Yeah, he said. It is. The bond between them hummed, low and steady as a heartbeat, warm in the way that permanent things are warm, not with excitement but with the deeper, more reliable heat of something that has decided to stay. Inside the house, Jean was making supper and Richard had come home from the shop with 4 new books, 2 of which turned out to have wizarding publishers and 1 of which had a helpful index. He'd lined them up on the kitchen table with a note that said, Hermione, probably relevant. Harry, probably interesting. Both of you, no reading at the supper table. They came in through the back door together, and the kitchen smelled like pasta and garlic and something good, and Jean pointed at the chair that had, over 6 weeks, become Harry's chair, and Harry sat in it with the ease of someone who had begun to understand that this was allowed. Hermione put her notebook away and sat in hers. This was home. Not the building, not exactly, though the building mattered, the safety of it, the smell of it. But this, the table, the 4 of them, the new books stacked and waiting. The knowledge that tomorrow she would read them, and the day after that she would find more questions, and the questions would lead to more answers, and every answer was a weapon or a shield or a tool, and she was going to need all 3. In a town on the other side of England, in a house that had gone quiet since its occupant began to reconstitute, piece by piece, memory by memory, borrowed body by borrowed body, something stirred. Something that remembered the feel of a curse rebounding. Something that had been informed, through the slow dark channels available to the near-dead, that there were 2 children in Surrey who were becoming something unprecedented. The something noted this. filed it with the attention of a creature that had always, above all else, known how to wait. And waited. Chapter 3, Letters and Lightning. The Hogwarts letters arrived on a Tuesday in July, 4 years later. Harry and Hermione were in the middle of an argument about flannel. Not an unpleasant argument, their arguments never were, despite being frequent and occasionally loud, but a focused, detailed disagreement about whether Nicholas Flamel's published notes on the Philosopher's Stone constituted genuine theoretical foundation or elaborate misdirection. Hermione's position was that the notes were genuine but incomplete. Harry's position was that incompleteness at that level of strategic detail was functionally identical to misdirection, which had made Hermione put down her quill and say that's actually a good point in the slightly annoyed tone she used when he made good points without warning. They were in what Richard called the study, which had started as a spare bedroom and had, over 4 years, become something between a library and a laboratory. 2 desks pushed together at the window. 4 full bookshelves, 2 magical and 2 not, the magical ones acquired through a combination of Diagon Alley visits. They'd been twice now, once with Dumbledore, who had shown them around with the air of someone simultaneously delighted and carefully managing the visit, and once on their own with Richard, who had responded to the entire experience with the enthusiasm of a man at an extremely unusual antique fair. A chalkboard covering most of one wall, currently covered in a network of connected theories about magical cores that Hermione had been refining for 3 years. It looked, somewhat, like what would happen if you asked 2 very intense 10-year-olds to design their ideal thinking space. Which was exactly what it was. The letters came through the window. Both at once, which Hermione noted was deliberate, not one letter addressed to Harry and one to her but 2 simultaneous arrivals, as though the magical delivery system had understood they were a unit. She caught hers before it hit the desk. Harry stopped in mid-air in front of him, which had been happening with increasing frequency, objects responding to him before he reached for them, as though the world around him had developed a very efficient predictive system. He looked at it floating there. Took it. They opened them at the same time. The letters were identical in content, and she read hers and felt the words land with the particular weight of a confirmation rather than a surprise. "We are pleased to inform you that you have been accepted to Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry." She'd known it was coming for 4 years, had been preparing for it for 4 years, had been reading the curriculum texts and their theoretical underpinnings for 4 years, and still the actual letter in her hands was something different from the anticipated letter. It was real. They were going. Harry set his letter down on the desk. He was looking at it with the focused expression that meant he was sorting something. "What?" she said. "Thinking about what it'll be like," he said. "Being there. After thinking about it for 4 years. It'll be different from what either of us imagined," she said. "It always is. You're excited. Obviously." She set her letter beside his on the desk and looked at the supply list, already cataloging. "You're nervous." He didn't deny it, which he wouldn't have, 4 years ago. "People will know my name there," he said. "The way Fitch knew it. The way the people in Diagon Alley last time." He paused. The second trip to Diagon Alley had been educational in multiple respects, one of which was that Harry Potter in Diagon Alley produced a reaction in people that ranged from reverent whispering to one man who'd burst into tears outside the apothecary. Harry had held that interaction with the careful, contained discomfort of someone who understood the emotional logic but had nowhere to put it. "They know the name," Hermione said. "They don't know you. And the ones at school who want a piece of the famous Harry Potter, will find," she said, "that the famous Harry Potter has better things to do and a very firm friend who is excellent at redirecting conversations." The almost smile. It had become, over 4 years, a full smile more often than not, but it still did the small version sometimes, when things landed in a particular way. "You're not going to let this be a problem." "I'm not going to let it be the problem," she said. "It'll be a thing that exists. We'll deal with it the way we deal with things. By knowing more about it than the problem expects us to." "Exactly." They told Jean and Richard at supper, which was somewhat theatrical since both parents had known the letters were due and had been performing casual normalcy with extraordinary commitment all morning. Richard said brilliant, opened a bottle of wine, and immediately began making a list of what supplies he'd need to find versus buy. Jean hugged Hermione for a long moment and then hugged Harry, who after 4 years accepted hugs from Jean with the naturalness of someone for whom the movement had become a known quantity. The shopping trip to Diagon Alley 3 days later was, by any measure, an occasion. They went with Jean this time, which meant things were handled with calm efficiency. Gringotts first. Harry had a vault, which he'd known about intellectually but which translated, in physical reality, into a room full of gold that he stood in for approximately 10 seconds before deciding it was going to take more time than he currently had to feel the correct things about it. Hermione had a bank account established from Muggle funds exchanged at the front desk, which the goblin teller processed with the expressionless professionalism of someone who had been doing this for 600 years and found everything equally unimpressive. Then the alley itself. Hermione moved through it with a list and a plan, which was the only sensible approach, and also with the sustained pleasure of someone finally accessing resources they'd been reading about for years. The bookshop was the highlight. She was in flourish and blots for 45 minutes, emerged with all required texts and 4 additional volumes she'd located in the advanced section and talked the sales assistant into selling to her on the basis that she'd already read the prerequisite material, which she demonstrated by reciting relevant passages when challenged. Harry, who had found the Quidditch supply shop next door and had been standing in it with the expression of someone presented with something they genuinely loved, came back to find her paying for a stack that came up to her chin. "All required?" he asked. "Mostly required," she said. "The top 3 are recommended. The others are foundational. You've already read the required ones." "I've read about the required ones. Reading the actual texts is different." She handed him the bag. "The wand shop is next." Ollivander's was the kind of small that was bigger inside than outside, which Hermione added mentally to her list of magical architectural principles to investigate. Ollivander himself was the kind of old that didn't correspond to any straightforward number. He might have been 70 or 170, and he looked at both of them with the silver eyes of someone who found wands considerably more interesting than the people wielding them. Until he looked at Harry. Then something different moved through his expression: recognition, reverence, and something she'd classify as professional excitement. "Harry Potter," Ollivander said. "I wondered when I'd see you." "Hello," Harry said, with the polite directness he'd developed for these encounters, neither dismissing the recognition nor being governed by it. "Your parents, both wandless naturally when," he stopped. Began again. "Your mother's wand was willow and unicorn hair. 10¼ inches. Beautiful for charms. Your father's was mahogany, 11 inches, pliable." He said both of these as though reciting names in a liturgy. "I remember every wand I've ever sold." "So we've been told," Harry said. Ollivander looked at him sharply, then at Hermione, who was observing with her notebook. "Are you writing this down?" he asked. "I write most things down," she said. "For later use." He held her gaze for a moment. Then he smiled, which rearranged his face into something entirely unexpected, less strange, more warm. "You'll want vine wood," he said. "Or perhaps dragon heartstring core. Possibly both." He began pulling boxes. "Let's see." Hermione's wand took 7 tries. 6 were wrong in interesting ways. The first made all the boxes on the left wall rattle simultaneously, the third caused a brief and self-contained rainstorm inside the shop, the 5th caught fire, which Ollivander said cheerfully was extremely promising. The 7th was 10¾ inches, vine wood, dragon heartstring, and when she picked it up, the warmth was immediate and unambiguous, not just the tingle of compatibility but something more considered, like a key in its lock. A gold-white light pulsed from the tip. The boxes on all 4 walls rattled simultaneously. Ollivander looked delighted. "Yes," he said. "That one." Harry's wand took 3 tries, which seemed fast until Ollivander muttered that it had been waiting. It was 11 inches, holly, and phoenix feather. He paused before saying those last two words, and said them with the weight of something he'd been holding. The phoenix that gave this feather, he said, gave only one other. I expect you know whose. Voldemort's, Harry said. Yes. Ollivander blinked. Most people don't say the name. It's just a name, Harry said. Using it doesn't give it any more power than it already has. He turned the wand over once, and gold sparks ran along his fingers where they touched the holly, and the temperature in the shop came up by 3 degrees and dropped back. Ollivander watched this. Remarkable, he said quietly. Remarkable. He looked at Hermione. And when you hold them together? They looked at each other. Hermione held her wand. Harry held his. They touched the tips together, no particular reason, just the obvious thing to do, and the wand shop did something it had apparently never done before in however many hundred years it had been standing, because Ollivander said "Oh my" in a voice stripped entirely of performance, all ancient silver eyes and real surprise. Both wands lit up simultaneously, and the light between them was not gold or white but something between the two, a color that didn't have a name in standard visual terminology, and every single box in the shop opened. They separated the wands. Right, Harry said. Yes, Hermione agreed. Ollivander was quiet for a moment. Then, you'll need cases. With proper bonding compartments. He produced them from under the counter with the air of someone who'd made them years ago on a hunch. I don't charge for those. On the train platform, King's Cross, which they reached through the barrier between 9 and 10 with Jean carrying the owl cage and Richard managing the trunk on a trolley with the focused energy of a man who had decided that magical infrastructure was simply a different kind of engineering, Hermione took one last look at the Muggle world she'd lived in for 10 years, the familiar and the ordinary, the world where she'd been a bright peculiar girl with controlled phenomena around her, and felt the weight of the transition with clarity. Not fear. Not exactly. The feeling of a door opening. Harry was beside her, card in hand, and she caught the edge of his expression, the same kind of clarity, the same recognition of a threshold. Ready, she said. Yeah, he said. You? I've been ready for 4 years. He laughed, and Jean hugged them both, and Richard shook Harry's hand and then clearly felt this was insufficient and hugged him too, and the train was there, red and enormous and real, and then they were on it. The compartment they found was near the middle of the train, which Hermione judged optimal, not near enough to the front to attract the attention of whatever prefect governance existed there, not so far back as to be in whatever social territory second and third years might have claimed. She stowed her bag with precision. Harry put the trunk up with a minimal effort that produced no visible magic, which he was good at now, not concealing, but economizing. They settled. The train began to move. Through the window, Jean waved until the platform curved out of sight. Richard had his hand up too, the other one already in his pocket where his notebook was, Hermione knew, because he'd been writing observations about the magical world since the beginning and intended to continue. She turned back to the compartment. Harry was looking at the countryside beginning to open up outside the window, and he had the expression she'd come to think of as receiving, taking something in, holding it, not performing a reaction. The fields going past. The distance opening up. First day of the rest of it, he said. First day of the part we've been preparing for, she corrected. You and your precision. You and your imprecision, she said, and he grinned, proper and immediate, and the bond between them was warm and settled and easy. The compartment door opened around 20 minutes in. A boy with red hair arrived first, then another, then a third, then the door opened again and a girl with a red plate and freckles looked in and said, "Shove up, Ron," to the second boy, who said, "I was here first, Ginny," and she said, "The whole compartment's empty except for them," which was true, there were 3 other benches. She came in anyway. Then a round-faced boy appeared behind her, looking apologetic. They sorted themselves out with the disorganized efficiency of people who'd been doing this their whole lives. The tallest red-haired boy, not Ron, someone older, a prefect badge on his chest, put his head in and said, "Don't be weird at the first years," at the general group, then disappeared. Percy, the boy named Ron, said, to Harry and Hermione, as an explanation, which they received without comment. "I'm Ron Weasley," Ron said. "Hermione Granger." "Harry Potter," Harry said. Ron's eyes went to the scar, a brief involuntary glance, and then he looked away and made a reasonable effort to move on from it. "You're both first years?" He'd registered that they'd arrived together, shared the comfortable proximity of people who'd been sharing space for years. "Yes," Hermione said. "You?" "Yeah. This is Neville," the round-faced boy, who nodded with the relieved expression of someone who'd worried about introductions, "and Ginny, my sister, she's not even starting yet. I wanted to see the train," Ginny said, with the simple authority of a youngest child who had made peace with simply doing what she intended. "Ginny's going to be in our year next year," Neville told Harry with the confiding air of someone sharing genuinely useful information. The conversation moved the way first meetings do when everyone involved is genuinely curious rather than performing. They talked about the wizarding world, and it became apparent quickly that Ron and Ginny had grown up in it and Neville mostly had, and Harry and Hermione had come at it from the outside. Ron was interested in Harry's scar with the kind of embarrassingly open interest of someone who'd grown up with the story as legend, and he kept glancing at it and then looking away. "You can look at it," Harry said, not unkindly. "It's just a scar." "Right," Ron said, looking. "Does it hurt?" "Not usually." "Dad says," Ron hesitated. "Dad says you're why you know who, why he went away. The whole family, we lost an uncle. In the war." He said this with the slightly formal care of something he'd been taught to carry with respect. "I'm sorry," Harry said. Ron looked at him. Whatever he'd expected from the famous Harry Potter, this apparently wasn't it. He nodded. Hermione was watching Neville, who had been quiet in the particular way of someone with things to say who wasn't sure of the room yet. "Neville," she said. "What's your favorite subject going to be?" His expression opened immediately. "Herbology," he said, and then looked surprised that it had come out so fast. "Good," she said. "Mine is probably charms, but herbology has fascinating theoretical dimensions that most people underestimate. I've been reading Sprout's foundational papers on magical plant symbiosis." "You've read Sprout's papers?" Neville said. Properly surprised. Properly interested. "She's read everything," Harry said, without inflection, which made Ginny laugh. By the time the trolley arrived, the compartment had settled into something comfortable. Hermione bought two things from the trolley, a pumpkin pasty and a book of magical sweets ingredient theory that she found under a stack of every flavor beans, which she held up and said, "This was under here," with the affronted energy of someone who could not believe useful information had been shelved this carelessly. Ron bought an enormous amount of sweets. Harry bought enough for everyone and didn't make a thing of it, just passed things around, which was the right way to do it. Ginny left to go back to her family's compartment around Oxfordshire, giving Harry the look of a 10-year-old trying very hard not to look like she was giving Harry a look. Harry registered it with the ease of someone who had learned to notice social dynamics without being destabilized by them. When she'd gone, Ron said, in the tone of absolute mortification known only to siblings, "She's had a thing about, you know, the famous, just ignore it." "Already forgotten," Harry said, which was a generous lie, and Ron looked grateful. Neville, emboldened by the herbology conversation, had begun talking to Hermione with increasing fluency about a particular strain of magical root that his grandmother had grown, and Hermione was asking him questions with genuine interest, because she was, and Harry was looking out the window again at the landscape getting wilder and more northern, the rolling fields giving way to steeper hills. "You've been friends a long time," Ron said to him, nodding toward Hermione. "For years," Harry said. Ron processed this. "Since before you knew you were a wizard?" "She found that out before I did," Harry said. She worked it out from books. Ron looked at Hermione with a new expression, which Harry noted, not the intimidated wariness of someone meeting a more knowledgeable person, but something more like genuine interest. "That's brilliant," Ron said. "Tell her that," Harry said. "She's right about things an unusual amount of the time and she appreciates it being acknowledged." "Do I say it like that? I acknowledge that you're right?" "She'd probably enjoy the specificity." Ron looked at Harry. Harry looked back. Ron grinned, sudden and wide. "All right, Harry Potter," he said. "You're all right." The castle appeared in the dusk the way things appear in your imagination when the imagining has been thorough and still somehow manages to exceed the version you made, not as a surprise but as a confirmation, like a word you've been carrying in a foreign language finally said aloud by a native speaker. Hermione leaned against the window and looked at it. Harry stood in the boat behind her, and she didn't need to turn around to know his expression. She felt it through the bond, that rare undiluted thing, genuine awe, clean of any performance. Hogwarts was lit up against the darkening sky, reflected on the black lake, enormous and real and old. Old in the deep way that very few things were old, not just in years but in weight, in the accumulated layers of everything that had happened inside it. She felt the castle from 300 yards away, across the water, a low resonance that was nothing like any other magical sensation she'd experienced. It was the Founder's merged cores, she thought, embedded in the stone, saturating the walls, 400 years of that ancient bond still quietly broadcasting. She thought, this castle is what we might become. The thought was not frightening. The sorting was complicated. Not for Hermione, who sat on the stool and put on the hat and felt it rummage through her mind with the manner of an archivist given 3 minutes in a new library, and the hat said, "My God, you're thorough," not aloud but clearly, and she said, "Which house?" inside her head, and it said, "You do well in Ravenclaw, the knowledge would please you, but the courage to act, to choose, to do rather than simply know, that is the axis of your nature, isn't it?" And she said, "Yes," and it said, "Gryffindor," aloud, to the hall. Harry sat on the stool afterward and the hat didn't move for a very long time. She could feel it from the Gryffindor table, not the hat's words, but Harry's end of the conversation, the particular quality of his attention, the groundedness. There was a stir in the hall, the assembled students watching the pause, which was already longer than any other, and teachers at the staff table exchanging looks. She watched Dumbledore, who was watching Harry with an expression she couldn't read entirely, attention, she thought, and care, and also that particular sadness he carried when he thought no one was looking. Then the hat opened its brim and said, "Gryffindor," and the table erupted. Harry took the hat off, handed it calmly to Professor McGonagall, walked to the Gryffindor table, and sat beside Hermione. "What did it say?" she asked, under the noise. "That I had the capacity for any of them," Harry said. "That the bravery was obvious but the mind was Ravenclaw and the loyalty was Hufflepuff and there was ambition too, if I chose to use it." "And you said Gryffindor." "I said wherever you were." He picked up a fork. The food had appeared. It said that was simultaneously the most and least Gryffindor reason it had ever heard. She laughed. He ate. Ron landed next to Harry a few names later and said, "Brilliant, both Gryffindor," and Neville arrived at the end of the sorting with an expression of profound relief and sat across from them, and the feast was loud and warm and full. Professor McGonagall showed the first years to the dormitories afterward, up the moving staircases that Hermione had read about and still found extraordinary in practice, through corridors that the castle arranged with subtle hospitality. In the common room, round-windowed and fire-lit and red, Hermione pulled Harry aside before the boys' staircase. "The castle responded to us," she said. He'd felt it too. She knew he had. Coming in on the boat. Crossing the wards. And again when we entered the great hall. Something in the deep structure, the Founder's residue, I think it recognizes what we are. What does that mean for us? I don't know yet. But the castle is old and it remembers things. We should pay attention to what it shows us. She paused. And Harry, tomorrow, with the professors. Don't be small. He looked at her. Don't hold back to seem manageable, she said. We've been doing that for 4 years, being careful about what we show people so we don't alarm anyone. We're here now. It's time to be what we actually are. You think people are ready for that? I think it's not our problem whether people are ready, she said. It's our problem whether we are. He considered this. Is this you telling me to stop being strategic about hiding and start being strategic about not hiding? Yes. All right. The full smile. Go to bed, Hermione. Good night, Harry. She went up the girls' staircase. Behind her, the fire in the common room crackled high for a moment, for no particular reason, and settled. The first morning of classes answered several questions about what Hogwarts was going to make of them. Charms was first. Professor Flitwick, small and bright-eyed and possessed of the genuine enthusiasm of someone who had been delighted by his subject for 60 years, set them the introductory feather levitation exercise, Wingardium Leviosa, which was the canonical first-year first lesson, and Hermione did it in approximately 4 seconds. The feather went up, hovered, rotated twice, and she put it back down. Flitwick blinked. Miss Granger. First attempt? I read the theory last summer, she said. I wanted to make sure the practice matched the model. And does it? The wrist movement feels slightly different from the description in curses and counter-curses. More of a flick than the text implies. I'd say the text underspecifies it. Flitwick looked at her with the expression of a musician who has just heard a 10-year-old correctly identify a piece by ear. Would you say so? He said. And can you articulate the difference more precisely? She could, and did, for 3 minutes, during which the rest of the class attempted their feathers with varying levels of success and Harry levitated his on the second try, then made it spell out her initials in the air above the desk, which she noticed with peripheral vision and turned to look at while Flitwick was still talking. Stop showing off, she said. You were showing off first, he said. I was demonstrating a theoretical point. I was demonstrating fine motor control. Flitwick looked between them and seemed to make a decision to simply enjoy his morning. Transfiguration with Professor McGonagall was different in texture. McGonagall arrived to class exactly on time, sat at the front, turned her desk into a pig and back, and surveyed 30 11-year-olds with the level gaze of someone who had taught for 40 years and could identify the ability level in a room within 10 minutes. She clocked Harry and Hermione within 5. The exercise was turning a match into a needle. Most students managed a partial transformation by the end of class, something slightly more metallic, something approximately needle-shaped. Hermione's match became a needle on her 3rd attempt and she spent the rest of the lesson asking McGonagall about the theory of human transfiguration, which McGonagall answered with increasing interest and decreasing professional distance. Harry's was more interesting. His match became a needle on the first try. On the second try, working through some intuitive impulse he didn't explain, it became a compass needle, functional, pointing north. McGonagall stopped the class to look at it. Potter, she said. Intentional? Mostly, Harry said. Explain mostly. I knew I wanted it to be a needle. The compass aspect, I just thought about direction. It responded. McGonagall looked at the compass needle for a moment. Then she wrote something on her notes. See me after class, she said. Not with the tone of trouble, with the tone of someone who had just found something they'd been looking for and wanted a better look. After class, in the corridor, Ron said, "Did you get into trouble?" "No," Harry said. "She wants to, what, recommend him for something?" Ron looked at Harry with genuine bafflement. "You turned a match into a compass." "Hermione turned hers into a needle faster than I did," Harry said. "Yeah, but she," Ron stopped. Looked at Hermione. "That was brilliant, by the way. You were right about the wrist thing, Flitwick's going to change his notes." Hermione looked at him. "Thank you," she said. It came out slightly surprised, because she'd been expecting qualification. "My mum's always saying Bill was the best at charms in his year," Ron said, with the easy confidence of someone delivering a genuine observation. "But you're better than Bill sounds." "I haven't met Bill." "He's mostly excellent," Ron said. "You should see him eat." Neville, who had managed to make his match silver along its entire length if not fully needle-shaped, said, "I think I'm more of a plants person." "Plants are important," Hermione said. "Foundational to half the potions theory, that's what I thought," Neville said, with the relief of someone being told the thing they're good at actually matters. McGonagall kept Harry for 7 minutes. When he came back, he caught up with them on the moving staircase and said, to Hermione, "She wants us to come to her office Thursday evening." "Both of us." "What for?" "She said she has some questions about our educational background and some material she'd like to discuss." He paused. "She also said she'd spoken with Flitwick, who'd spoken with Dumbledore, and that she wanted to, her exact words, establish a proper framework for your development before anyone else tried to do it for us." Hermione processed this. "She's trying to get ahead of the ministry." "That's what I thought." "I like her," she said. "I could tell. You asked her 12 questions in 45 minutes. 13, she said. The last one was rhetorical, but it still counts." That evening in the common room, first years scattered around with homework they'd barely started, Hermione sat at the table nearest the window and opened her Ancient Runes text, an elective she'd specifically requested in a letter to McGonagall before school began, which McGonagall had approved with what Hermione had interpreted as understated pleasure, and felt the castle around her. It was a constant thing now, since crossing the wards. A low, warm awareness, like the bond with Harry but different, not personal, not intimate, but vast. The castle was old and full and alive in a way that no building had any right to be, and it was doing something she didn't have a word for yet. Paying attention. The way a very large creature might notice a small familiar motion in its space. The fire in the common room was slightly higher near her table than anywhere else. She'd noticed. She hadn't said anything. She filed it. Harry dropped into the chair across from her with his transfiguration notes and a pumpkin pasty from the plate that had appeared on the common room table after supper. "Draco Malfoy introduced himself in the corridor before dinner," he said. She looked up. "How did that go?" "He offered me the right kind of friends," Harry said. "Made it sound like an obvious choice. Like I should be glad he'd made the offer." "And you said?" "I said I thought I'd work out for myself who the right kind were." He opened his notes. "He didn't like that." "No," she said. "He wouldn't." She'd had her own Malfoy moment. In the corridor before dinner, he'd swept his eyes over her with the particular assessment of someone evaluating things by category, found that she was Muggle-born and therefore categorically dismissible, and looked away. She'd found this, if anything, a useful simplification. Anyone who categorized people at first glance and stopped there was doing her the favor of making themselves legible. "He'll be a problem," Harry said, without heat. "An observation." "His father is the bigger problem," Hermione said. "The Malfoy family has 4 sitting ministry positions and 2 board seats at the school governors. Lucius Malfoy is the kind of man who shapes institutions rather than challenging them. That's more dangerous than anything Draco's going to do in a corridor." Harry looked at her. "You've already read Wizarding Genealogy and Political Structures," she said. "3rd week of August." "Of course you have." He said it the way he said most things about her reading, with genuine appreciation that was also vaguely amused, the tone of someone who found a particular quality both useful and entirely its own thing. "We should find out who else is on the board. And whether Dumbledore has an arrangement with them or a conflict." "Already started," she said, turning a page. "I made a list." Above them, the fire crackled higher for a moment. Then subsided. The castle settled around them, warm and very old, doing whatever it was doing, remembering, perhaps. Recognizing. Outside, first-year Hogwarts was already rearranging itself around two new students the way water rearranges around something solid. And somewhere in the dungeons, in an office full of cold light and laconic intelligence, Professor Severus Snape was reading a report from Flitwick and a report from McGonagall and sitting very still with both in his hands, his expression unreadable, the private architecture of his thoughts entirely hidden. He read them twice. He set them down. He stared at the wall for 31 seconds. Then he picked up a quill and began composing a letter to nobody he was prepared to name yet, in terms sufficiently oblique to be unactionable, which contained, at its center, a single question: have you considered what happens to the prophecy if the chosen one is no longer alone? He did not send it that night. He put it in the bottom drawer with the other things he was not yet prepared to move on. But he kept thinking. Chapter 4. What the castle knows. The thing about Quirinus Quirrell was that he smelled wrong. Hermione noticed it at the first defense against the dark arts lesson, sitting 3 rows back with Harry to her left and Ron to her right and Neville in front of them, and she noticed it the way she noticed most things, not loudly, not immediately, but as a low, persistent note of wrongness that she filed and returned to. Professor Quirrell stuttered and fumbled and wore a purple turban he claimed was a gift from an African prince and which smelled, beneath the heavy lavender it was soaked in, of something darker. She couldn't identify it from the smell alone. But she wrote it down that evening: Quirrell, something wrong. Investigate. Harry had noticed too. She felt it through the bond before she could look at him, a sharpening, a specific kind of attention. After class, walking back toward Gryffindor Tower, he said, under the noise of the corridor, his hands. What about them? He never uses them. The whole lesson, whenever he moved toward a student or toward a piece of equipment, he'd stop. Pull back. Harry adjusted his bag. I thought it was nerves at first. It's not nerves. The turban, she said. Yes. The smell under the lavender. Yes. He glanced at her. What is it? I'm not sure yet. But I know what it's close to. She had the fairy tale book open in her mind, the chapter not on confluentia but on the chapter before it, on parasitic magical entities, on the old category of being called remnants that persisted after a catastrophic magical failure. I need the library. Tonight? Now, she said. Ron, who had been walking alongside them with the comfortable proximity of someone who had decided in 3 weeks that Harry and Hermione were his people and intended to be near them as much as possible, said, What's in the library? Answers, Hermione said. To what? To why our defense professor smells like he's hosting something that should be dead, Harry said. Ron stopped walking. Then started again. Right. Library. Good. They found it in 2 hours. Hermione found it, specifically, in a text she'd had to access through the restricted section using a note from Flitwick who had given it with the pragmatic trust of a teacher who has already established that his most advanced first-year student has the theoretical grounding to handle advanced material. The book was called Parasitic Magical Entities, a Theoretical Survey, 3rd edition, and it was not cheerful reading, but it was thorough reading, and on page 212 she found what she was looking for. A remnant, that is, a fragment of a magical core detached from its primary source through deliberate or catastrophic severance, requires, in order to maintain coherence over extended time, a host. The host must be a living magical being capable of sustaining the remnant's resonance. The host will typically show signs of constitutional deterioration over time, as the remnant draws on the host's own magical reserves. She turned the book so Harry could read it. He read it. Then he looked up. Quirrell is hosting Voldemort's remnant, he said. One of them, she said. Remember what we worked out about Horcruxes? If he fragmented his soul deliberately before Godric's Hollow, then what came back after the curse rebounded isn't the whole of him. It's one piece trying to reconstitute. And it needs something to do that, Harry said. His voice was even. She could feel the specific quality of his thinking, fast and clear, no panic in it, just the clean forward motion of someone identifying a problem and moving toward it. What does it need? She was already on page 219. Something with extraordinary concentrating power. An object that amplifies magical restoration. Something like the Philosopher's Stone, Harry said. Ron, across the table, had been reading along and keeping quiet with the focused concentration of someone who understood that this conversation was happening at a speed that didn't accommodate interruption. Now he said, the one that Gringotts moved. They both looked at him. Dad works at the ministry, Ron said. He mentioned it at dinner in August. Said there'd been a break-in at Gringotts, vault cleared out by Dumbledore's people, very hush-hush. He paused. Said it at dinner. To Mum. I have 5 brothers. Nothing stays private. The stone is at Hogwarts, Hermione said. She was already 3 steps forward. Dumbledore moved it here. Which means Quirrell, which means Voldemort, came here deliberately. To a school with 1,000 students because Dumbledore is here, Harry said. Which means it's protected. Which means whoever wants it has to get through whatever Dumbledore built to protect it. His jaw set. It's a trap. Or a test, Hermione said quietly. Harry looked at her. Think about it, she said. We've been here 6 weeks. We haven't been subtle. McGonagall and Flitwick both know what we're capable of. Dumbledore certainly does. If there's a dark wizard literally inside the school, wearing a professor as a coat, going after an object in the basement, she paused. Either Dumbledore doesn't know, which I don't believe, or he knows and he's waiting to see what happens. He's waiting to see what we do, Harry said. He's been treating you as a chess piece since before you could walk, she said, flat and plain. Not angry, they'd moved past anger about Dumbledore into something more useful, which was clear-eyed assessment. The Philosopher's Stone isn't the prize here. We are. He wants to see what we do when we find it. Then we should decide what we want to do, Harry said. Not what he expects. Hermione closed the book. Around them, the library was settling into evening quiet, the last students drifting out, Madame Pants doing her circuit of the shelves with the vigilance of a very literate security guard. Here's what I don't want, Hermione said. I don't want to wait while Voldemort uses a teacher as a host and possibly hurt someone. I don't want to hand this to Dumbledore and let him manage it on his schedule. And I don't want to go marching into the 3rd floor corridor without understanding exactly what we're walking into. So we find out what's down there, Harry said. All of it. Everything between us and the stone. And we go when we're ready, she said. Not when the plot demands it. Ron, who had been listening to this exchange with the expression of someone watching 2 people play chess at a speed that made the pieces blur, said, I'd like to help. They both looked at him. I know I'm not. I haven't read everything you've read and I can't do what you can do, Ron said, with the straightforward self-assessment that was one of the things she'd come to value most about him. No false modesty, no false confidence. Just an accurate map of where he was. But I know things. About how wizards think. About how families like Malfoy's work. About Quidditch, which isn't relevant right now but may be. He paused. And I'm good at chess. Chess. Harry said. Really good, Ron said. I think there might be a reason for that. He was right. There was. They spent the next 3 weeks watching Quirrell with the careful subtlety of 3 11-year-olds who had good reason not to be noticed watching. It wasn't difficult. Quirrell, absorbed in whatever Voldemort was directing him to attempt, was not paying close attention to first years. Hermione attended his classes with her notebook and catalogued every observable symptom. The deterioration was visible if you knew what to look for, the pallor, the occasionally unfocused eyes, the moments where he seemed to be listening to something no one else could hear. In potions, the other variable made itself visible. Snape had been waiting, Hermione thought, for an opportunity to establish the hierarchy of the classroom, which was not an unusual desire in a teacher but was in his case filtered through a very specific personal history. Harry's name he'd said with the tone of someone picking up something sharp by the blade. She'd felt it through the bond, the old hostility, something predating Harry by decades, pointed at the name Potter in a way that had nothing to do with Harry himself and everything to do with whoever James Potter had been. Then Snape had turned to her. "Granger. What would I get if I added powdered root of asphodel to an infusion of wormwood?" "Draught of living death," she said, "which is classified as a soporific of the 7th category and requires a mastery-level brewing license under the 1942 Restricted Potions Act. The asphodel and wormwood should be combined in a ratio of 3 parts to 2, not the equal ratio some early sources suggest, and the temperature must be reduced by 5 degrees from the standard cauldron setting before adding the saprophyros beans." Silence. "The kind that has texture." Snape looked at her with his black eyes doing whatever Snape's black eyes did when he was recalculating. "Where did you read that?" "Most Patenti Potions, Chapter 4, she said. "And the correction about the ratio is in Libatius Borgia's Annotations, 1978 edition. The standard edition your supply list recommends doesn't include the annotations." "I'm aware of what edition I specified," Snape said. "I bought both," she said. "In case they disagreed, which they do, on 3 points." Another silence. Snape looked at her for 3 full seconds. Then he moved on. He did not give her points, she hadn't expected him to, she was already working out the political cartography of how Snape gave and took points, but he also didn't try the belittling approach again, and she filed that as useful information. He'd taken a measurement and adjusted his approach, which meant he was intelligent and pragmatic. Both were worth knowing. Harry's potions, that first lesson, were technically flawless. She knew they were. She'd watched him. Snape knew they were too, she could see it in the way he looked at Harry's cauldron and said nothing, not praise, but the absence of critique, which from Snape was apparently equivalent. He gave Harry no points and took none, which was a form of neutrality that told her Snape was still working out what to do with Harry Potter, who was not what he'd expected. Good, she thought. Let him work. The McGonagall meeting happened on their 5th Thursday, and it was considerably more interesting than they'd anticipated. McGonagall's office was orderly and precisely what you'd expect of her, everything in its place, achievement certificates framed with precision, a tartan tin of biscuits on a corner table that was the warmest thing in the room. She offered them tea, which they accepted. She sat behind her desk and looked at both of them with the level attention that was her default mode, the kind that suggested she missed nothing and had already formed an opinion. "You've been watching Quirrell," she said, without preamble. Hermione didn't flinch. "Yes. Tell me what you found." So they told her. All of it, the smell, the hands, the parasitic remnant theory, the philosopher's stone, Hermione's reading from the restricted section. McGonagall listened without interrupting and with the focused stillness of someone who had been afraid of something for weeks and was now finding out the shape of it. When they finished, she was quiet for a moment. "You've told no one else?" "No," Harry said. "Not even, Dumbledore knows," Hermione said. "Or strongly suspects. He arranged all the protections. He moved the stone here. He's been watching it. He has to know what's living in Quirrell." McGonagall's expression was composed and unreadable, which Hermione had come to understand meant she was having feelings she wasn't prepared to perform. "Albus has his reasons." "I know," Hermione said. "We've been accounting for those." She looked at McGonagall steadily. "Our question is about what we should do. We'd like your perspective." McGonagall looked at her for a long moment. Then at Harry. "You intend to deal with it yourselves?" "We intend to be prepared," Harry said. "Whatever happens, whether Dumbledore acts first or Quirrell attempts something, we want to understand the obstacle course between the 3rd floor corridor and the stone. We want to know what's down there." McGonagall put her hands flat on the desk. "How did you know it's a corridor?" Neville told us, Hermione said. He overheard Filch arguing with Peeves about the third floor the first week and mentioned it. We extrapolated. McGonagall looked at the ceiling briefly. It's not one obstacle, she said. It's a series. Each one designed by a teacher. I won't tell you what they are. But I will tell you, she paused, and something moved in her expression, a decision being made. I will tell you that Albus is away on ministry business this Thursday. He'll be gone 3 days. She said nothing more about it. She asked them about their coursework. She gave them each 3 biscuits from the tartan tin. She sent them back to the dormitory. In the corridor, Harry said, Thursday. Thursday, Hermione agreed. They went on a Thursday night, at 1 in the morning, with a disillusionment charm Harry had learned from a 7th-year textbook and could apparently do without a wand, which had surprised the textbook's description. Ron came too, which they'd told him not to because it was safer with fewer people, and he'd said, I know. I'm coming anyway. Because it's my friends and it's chess. Neville, who they hadn't told, appeared at the dormitory door at 12:30 looking resolved. I know you didn't tell me, he said. I worked it out. I'm not as unobservant as people think. They went 5. The third-floor corridor opened with a simple Alohomora. Beyond it was the Cerberus, Fluffy, Hagrid's, which they knew because Ron had asked Hagrid about large magical animals as part of a strategy to identify what the corridor might contain, and Hagrid had mentioned, with no apparent understanding that he was giving operational intelligence, that he'd lent Dumbledore something for a project and was very proud of it. 3 heads, enormous, and asleep because the harp in the corner was still playing, winding down. Harry looked at the trapdoor. I'll go first, he said. We'll go together, Hermione said. It'll be safer if, Harry. He met her eyes. The bond was a quiet, steady thing between them, a warmth that right now carried her complete refusal to be argued out of going beside him. Together, he said. They dropped through the trapdoor together, Ron directly behind, Neville after that. The Devil's Snare was immediate and enthusiastic, and Hermione had read about it in second-year herbology materials and non-verbally flooded the room with light before it got hold of more than one arm, which it released with indignant speed. Ron said, that was, and Hermione said, yes, keep moving. The Flying Keys chamber had a broom and a complicated airborne lock situation that would have taken a reasonably skilled adult several minutes. Harry was in the air in 30 seconds and had the key in another 20, moving with the natural instinctive grace that he brought to a broomstick, which Hermione found genuinely beautiful in an analytical way. She was not, she had established, a Quidditch person as a spectator sport, but Harry flying was a different category of thing, something purely functional becoming purely elegant. How are you so fast? Ron called up. I can see where it's going to go before it gets there, Harry said, and Dove. The chess board was Ron's, as he'd known it would be. He stood at the edge of it and looked at it with the calm of a person looking at something they were made for, and Hermione watched him become, in real time, something slightly different from the boy she'd been watching for 6 weeks, more certain, more completely himself. He called the moves with clean authority and the board responded, and he didn't hesitate, not even when he saw what the endgame required. You'll need me to be the knight, he said. I'll take the hit. It'll knock me off, but it won't, Ron, Hermione said. I've run this 3 times in my head, he said, with the absolute steadiness of someone who has already made their decision. It's the only clean path to checkmate. You two are going to need to be functional at the end of this. I'll be fine. He paused. Tell me I'm right about the chess. She looked at the board. She had studied chess because she studied most things, but it was not her domain of mastery. She looked at the positions and ran the logic forward. You're right about the chess, she said. He nodded. Then go. He looked at Harry. Don't do something stupid. I wasn't planning to, Harry said. You have a habit of plans going sideways. Hermione's told me. Hermione tells you everything. I'm a useful person to tell things to, Ron said, already moving to the knight's position. Go. They went. The logic puzzle was Snape's. She knew his aesthetic immediately, the cold elegant precision of it, the way it was designed for someone who panicked to fail. She solved it in 4 minutes. Harry watched her and made one suggestion at the 3-minute mark, about the second bottle, that shaved time off. She looked at him. He shrugged. She counted the suggestion. The final chamber had no more puzzles. It had a mirror, enormous, gold-framed, the most beautiful object in the room, and it had Quirrell, standing before it, and even from the doorway Hermione could see the 2 layers of him, the man who had been a nervous academic with a genuine love of his subject, now depleted and wrong-looking, the color of old paper, and beneath that something that moved in his shadow like a second shadow moving against the light. He knew they were there. He turned. The stutter was gone. "Harry Potter," he said, in a voice that had too much resonance for one man's throat. "And his little, don't," Harry said. One word, no spell, just the quality of absolute zero tolerance, and the temperature in the room dropped 6 degrees and Quirrell stopped speaking mid-sentence. The look on the professor's face, both layers of it, recalibrated. Voldemort, Hermione understood, had expected this to be simple. He'd expected a child. He'd been working from information that was 6 years out of date. She looked at the mirror of Eriste. She knew what it showed, she'd read about it in 2 separate sources, and she understood Dumbledore's method. The stone could only be retrieved by someone who wanted to find it but not use it. She understood this. "Which meant, Harry," she said. "The stone. You should be the one." He was already moving toward the mirror, because he'd worked it out too, because they thought along the same lines more and more often now. He looked into it. She watched his face. The mirror was showing him something, some deep desire of his, and she knew from the particular expression that came over him, gentle, complicated, warm, that it was his parents. She'd always known that would be what the mirror showed him. She did not look into it herself. She kept her eyes on Quirrell and what wrote him. Harry put his hand into the mirror. She felt it through the bond, a sensation she had no previous category for, like cold water and fire in the same moment, like something being given and something being removed simultaneously. His hand came back out. He was holding a small red stone. Quirrell made a sound. The second shadow moved, and for a moment the shape of it was clearer, a face, barely anything, just the shape of a terrible intention wrapped in the memory of humanity. "Give it to me," Quirrell said, and both voices came out together. "No," Harry said. Quirrell moved. He was across the room faster than a deteriorated man had any right to be, Voldemort driving the body past its limits, and he grabbed Harry's wrist. What happened next happened in approximately 2 seconds. When Quirrell's hands made contact with Harry's skin, the screaming started. Not Harry's, Quirrell's, both voices, the host and the parasite, both simultaneously encountering something they couldn't process. The same thing that had killed a curse 7 years ago. The mark of a mother's love embedded in Harry's skin and amplified, now, by 4 years of another kind of love, a different kind, not lesser, the kind that walks past adults like they're not obstacles and means it, the kind that says I'll find out and does, the kind that says you deserve to know and tells you everything. Harry's skin was burning where Quirrell touched it. Not Harry's, Quirrell's. The parasitic remnant recoiling from contact with something it fundamentally could not endure. Hermione, in the 2 seconds this took, hit Quirrell with every nonverbal she had, not stupefy, not the elegant spells she'd been practicing in theory for 4 years but something older, something that came up through her from the deep structure of the bond, a wave of force that she didn't have a name for and didn't need one. It hit Quirrell in the chest and he flew backward into the mirror of Eriste and the mirror cracked end to end, and the remnant, that thin, shrieking, half-nothing, tore free of Quirrell with the sound of something that should not exist unmaking itself, and scattered in the room like smoke in wind. And was gone. Quirrell lay against the broken mirror. Still breathing, she checked immediately, because he was a host and what had been writing him was not his fault. Barely breathing, but breathing. Harry stood in the center of the room with the stone in his hand. His scar was bleeding, a thin line down his forehead, and he was looking at where the remnant had been with an expression she couldn't fully read, not satisfaction, not triumph, something quieter. Recognition, maybe. The settling of something that had been unresolved. She crossed the room to him. She touched his face, carefully, checked the cut. "You're all right." "Yeah." He looked at his hand, the stone sitting in his palm. Small and red and incongruously ordinary. "We should give this to McGonagall." "Yes." "Not Dumbledore." "No," she agreed. "McGonagall." They walked back through the chambers. Ron was sitting against the wall in the chess chamber with a bruise the size of a dinner plate across his left shoulder and a thoroughly vindicated expression. "I heard screaming," he said. "Good screaming or bad screaming?" "It's done," Harry said. "Voldemort's gone," Hermione said. "Or this piece of him." "It's scattered." "Pieces," Ron said. "There are more." "Yes," Harry said. "We know." Ron looked at the stone. "Is that it?" "Yes." "Good." Ron stood up, winced, did not make a fuss about the wince. "Can we go? My shoulder is genuinely terrible." Neville met them on the other side of the trapdoor, intact, with the expression of someone who had been keeping watch with fierce and unnecessary competence. "Nothing came through," he said. "I transfigured the lock. Extra insurance." They all looked at him. "What?" he said. "You said I was good at transfiguration." "We didn't say that," Harry said. "McGonagall did," Neville said, with quiet dignity. "After she asked me to stay behind the week before last. She said I was underestimating myself and that my instincts were sound if I trusted them." He paused. "So I trust them." They gave the stone to McGonagall at 2:30 in the morning in her office, which she opened at their knock with the expression of someone who had not been sleeping. She took it from Harry's hand and looked at it and then looked at them, all four of them, Ron's bruise, the cut on Harry's forehead, Neville's faint scorch marks from the snare, and said nothing for a long moment. "Quirrell is in the final chamber," Hermione said. "He's alive. He'll need medical attention." McGonagall nodded. She said, "All four of you. My class. Every session. You answer my questions honestly about what you can do and what you need to develop. And you come to me before you do anything like this again." She looked at each of them in turn. "Agreed?" "Agreed," Hermione said. "Yeah," Harry said. "Absolutely," Ron said, with the relief of someone being officially adopted. "Yes, Professor," Neville said. Dumbledore returned 2 days later. He came to find them in the Great Hall at breakfast, and he sat across from Harry and Hermione with the blue eyes doing their assessment, and he looked at both of them for a long time. "Minerva told me," he said. "Good," Harry said. "The stone has been arranged to be destroyed. Nicholas Flamel is aware and accepting." He paused. "You acted without telling me." "You weren't here," Hermione said. "You could have waited." "For how long?" Harry asked. "How long were you going to wait? To act, to tell us, to stop using a school full of children as a setting for a test you designed?" Dumbledore looked at him. The grandfatherly warmth was present, but something else was too, something that might, in someone less controlled, have been shame. "I underestimated the timeline," he said. "I believed Quirrell would not act until the end of the year." "You believed I would not act until the end of the year," Harry said. "You thought the plot would unfold on your schedule." A pause. "Yes," Dumbledore said. "I did. I was wrong." He said it directly, without qualification, and Hermione noted this. Albus Dumbledore saying I was wrong was not nothing. "I have been," in several respects, treating you, as elements of a design rather than as people making their own decisions. That is a habit I need to break. Yes, Hermione said. It is. Another pause. Something shifted in Dumbledore's expression, the small internal adjustment of a man revising a deeply held assumption. The piece of Voldemort that was in Quirrell, it scattered. Yes. It will reconstitute. Slowly. But it will. We know, Harry said. And we know about the other pieces. Dumbledore was very still. You know about the Horcruxes. We worked it out 4 years ago, Hermione said. From the theory, from the scar, from the available evidence. We've been developing a framework for dealing with them. Dumbledore looked at her with an expression she had never seen on him before, and it took her a moment to identify it. It was the look of a man who has been carrying a weight alone for a very long time, encountering someone else who is already holding part of it. Relief, she thought. Complicated, problematic, entirely genuine relief. Sit down, Harry said, and slid the toast rack toward him. We have things to discuss. And Dumbledore, the most powerful wizard in Britain, sat down at the Gryffindor table at 8 in the morning and accepted a piece of toast from Harry Potter, and Hermione opened her notebook, and they talked. Not everything was resolved. It couldn't be. Voldemort's remaining Horcruxes were scattered, unknown in number, hidden across the country, and the remnant that had been in Quirrell was gone but not gone, and there was a war that hadn't finished, just paused. Nothing was simple. Nothing was safe. But the castle was warm around them, and the bond was steady, and the morning light came through the hall's enchanted ceiling in long gold lines, and Harry Potter was eating toast across from Albus Dumbledore and not being managed. He was at the table. He was present. He was choosing. That was different from everything that had come before. Chapter 5, The Ministry Wants a Word. The summer between first and second year was productive. Hermione spent it the way she spent most of her time, reading, theorizing, building frameworks, but with a new quality of focus, because now she had a proper target. The Horcruxes. Dumbledore, in 3 subsequent conversations before term ended, had shared what he knew, which was more than she'd expected and less than she'd hoped. He knew Horcruxes existed. He suspected there were multiple. He had a theory about the diary, a specific object he'd encountered circumstantial evidence for, connected to Tom Riddle's time at Hogwarts. He did not know where it was. She did, by mid-July. It took cross-referencing 3 sources, the Riddle history that Dumbledore had shared in their conversations, a Ministry archive document Ron's father Arthur Weasley had mentioned at a dinner she and Harry had attended at the Burrow in late June, the Weasley household, which operated at a volume and warmth that had initially overwhelmed Harry but which he'd found his footing in by the second visit, Ron's family absorbing both of them with the cheerful thoroughness of people who simply had more room for people than most, and a private letter written by a Hogwarts governor in 1959 that Hermione had found in the school library's archived correspondence section, which she'd been methodically working through since October. The diary had been given to Lucius Malfoy. She told Harry on a Tuesday evening in the study, with the chalkboard behind her covered in the network of connections she'd drawn. Harry read it, all of it, methodically. Then he looked at the board for a long time. Malfoy, he said. Lucius, not Draco. Though Draco may know something, he's 12, not stupid, and he lives in that house. Malfoy has a Horcrux, Harry said. A piece of Voldemort's soul. In his house. And he may or may not know what it is. He almost certainly knows what it is, Hermione said. He was a Death Eater. He'd have been told. The question is whether he intends to use it or whether having it is purely about leverage. Harry looked at her. Leverage for what? For when Voldemort comes back, she said. If you have a Horcrux, you have a bargaining chip. You're valuable. You survive the transition back to power. She paused. Lucius Malfoy is not a true believer. He's an opportunist. That makes him more dangerous in some ways and more predictable in others. Because opportunists can be anticipated, Harry said. They always move toward the best outcome for themselves. And the best outcome for Lucius Malfoy currently is maintaining his ministry positions, his social standing, and his family's safety, while keeping one foot in a door that may become very important if things go the wrong way. She tapped the board. The diary is insurance. And the easiest way to use it as insurance is to put it somewhere it can be active, somewhere it can start the work of reconstituting Voldemort's power without Lucius appearing to be directly responsible. Harry was quiet for a moment. Hogwarts, he said. Hogwarts, she confirmed. Second year. Draco goes back to school with a diary that's not really a diary, and something starts happening, and by the time anyone traces it back to Lucius, he can say he had no idea what was in it. We need to get to it first, Harry said. Before September. Working on that, she said. They went to Dumbledore with it the following week, with Hermione's full written analysis and Harry's concise summary of the operational problem, which was that retrieving a Horcrux from Malfoy Manor required either breaking and entering, which was illegal and dangerous, or finding another vector. Dumbledore listened to the presentation with the attention he'd given them since the stone, which was considerably more real than the attention he'd given them before it, full, focused, and without the particular condescension that powerful adults often brought to conversations with children. When they finished, he said, "The diary." "Yes," Hermione said. "I had suspected an object," he said. "I didn't know which one." He looked at her analysis for a long time. "This is, Miss Granger, this is exceptional work." "Thank you. What are we going to do about it?" He looked at both of them over his glasses. "I have a method of accessing Malfoy Manor," he said. "Not direct access, that would require an invitation and Lucius and I are not currently on invitation terms. But I can arrange for a ministry inspection. The Misuse of Muggle Artifacts Office conducts periodic reviews of known Death Eater households. Arthur Weasley handles those inspections." "Mr. Weasley would need to know what he's looking for," Harry said. "I'll speak with Arthur." Dumbledore paused. "This needs to be handled carefully. If Lucius believes the diary has been identified as a Horcrux, he'll either use it immediately or destroy it, and either outcome is worse than retrieving it quietly. So the inspection needs to look routine," Hermione said. "He looks for Muggle artifacts, finds the diary incidentally, and removes it as part of a standard confiscation." "Precisely. And after it's removed?" Harry asked. "Basilisk venom," Hermione said. They both looked at her. "Theoretically. I've been reading about Horcrux destruction. The soul fragment is anchored in the physical object, but it's not the object itself. To destroy it, you need something that can damage both the physical container and the magical anchoring simultaneously. Basilisk venom is corrosive at both levels. Fiend fire would work too, but it's substantially less controllable." Dumbledore looked at her. "You've been researching Horcrux destruction." "Since January," she said. "It seemed like a gap in our preparation." "Where," he said carefully, "did you find this information?" "Secrets of the Darkest Art," she said. Restricted section. Professor Flitwick's authorization, November. Flitwick authorized. He said he'd rather I read it under supervision than find it on my own and read it without any framework, she said. I thought that was sensible. He also sat with me while I read it and we discussed the theoretical implications for 2 hours. It was very productive. Dumbledore made a sound that might, in a less composed man, have been a laugh. Right, he said. Basilisk venom. The diary came out of Malfoy Manor in August, tucked into a confiscated box of Muggle electronics along with several other objects Arthur Weasley had removed. Arthur knew what he was retrieving and did it with the cheerful competence of a man who found this sort of thing genuinely interesting. He handed it to Dumbledore, who gave it to Harry and Hermione in his office with a small glass vial and the words, "1 drop is sufficient. Please be careful." Harry set the diary on Dumbledore's desk. Hermione opened the vial, which she had to hold with a folded cloth because even the outside of the glass was faintly warm. She tipped one drop onto the diary's cover. The reaction was significant. The diary screamed, which was not a sound diaries should make, and the pages blackened from the center outward, and from the center of the blackening something that was almost a shape and almost a face rose briefly, the second time Hermione had seen that terrible almost nothing, and she said, "There," quietly and without drama, because it was important to be clear about what they were doing and why, and then it was gone. The diary was a ruined object, nothing more. Harry let out a slow breath. "One," Hermione said. "One," he agreed. The Burrow dinner that July had introduced them to the full scope of the Weasley family, which was an experience. Bill was 20 and looked like he'd decided handsomeness was an interesting project. Charlie was 18 and had a burned scar on his left forearm from a dragon-related encounter that he described with the enthusiasm of someone for whom near death had been an excellent weekend. Percy was 14 and had already identified himself as a person of institutional loyalty, which Hermione thought was both his greatest strength and his most significant vulnerability. The twins, Fred and George, were 13 and operated as a single distributed intelligence that was considerably more dangerous than either twins' individual cleverness would suggest. And then there was Ginny, 10, who looked at Harry with the careful studied casualness of someone working very hard to look uncasual, and Harry, who had been learning to read social dynamics with increasing accuracy, registered it and made no issue of it, which she thought was the right approach and also the kind one. "Your family is enormous," Harry said to Ron, on the way back to Heather Drive in Richard's car. "You get used to it," Ron said, who was staying the week before September. "How many people were in that kitchen at one point?" "I counted 9. Normal for dinner. Christmas you should see. We get up to 14 when all the cousins come." Ron paused. "I know it's a lot." "It's brilliant," Harry said, and meant it, and the warmth in his voice was uncomplicated. Hermione, in the front seat, caught her father's eye in the mirror. He gave a small nod. September came, and they went back to Hogwarts, and the year announced its particular character immediately. Gilderoy Lockhart arrived as defense against the dark arts professor with the comprehensive self-promotion of someone who had decided that confidence, applied at sufficient volume and wattage, was functionally indistinguishable from competence. He swept into the first lesson in robes the color of fresh forget-me-nots, gave each student a quiz about himself, and described 6 creatures he'd personally vanquished with the specific language of someone who had written the accounts in a very comfortable chair some time after the events and given himself all the best lines. Hermione watched him for 11 minutes and then wrote in her notebook, "Fraud." She showed it to Harry under the desk. He'd already written the same word. "The Cornish pixie thing was well documented," she said, quietly, after class, "but only by Lockhart himself, and the eyewitness accounts he cites in the chapter are suspiciously uniform in their praise. They all use the same 3 descriptive terms. That's not how multiple independent witnesses write." "He's taking credit for things other people did," Harry said. "Memory charms," she said. "That's my theory. He finds a real incident, interviews the actual person responsible, takes their memory of it, writes his book. Can we prove it? Not yet. But we don't need to prove it to know it's true. We just need to keep it in mind when he's teaching us, which means everything he says has to be independently verified." "Right." Harry paused. "He's useless for actual defense instruction." "Completely useless," she agreed. "We'll have to work on that ourselves." This became one of the year's secondary projects, supplementing Lockhart's classes with actual defense education, which they did in the Room of Requirement, a room Hermione had found in October, by following the castle's occasional nudges, those moments when a corridor looked slightly different than it should, when a passage opened that hadn't been there yesterday. The room gave them what they needed, a proper practice space, a library of defense texts, and the absolute privacy to work at their actual level without worrying about what the year group would make of it. Ron and Neville came. Ginny, who had started her first year and had absorbed more practical knowledge than most of her classmates within her first month through the sheer osmosis of growing up in a family full of wizards, found out about the room in November and appeared at the door with the expression of someone who had done the arithmetic and intended to be useful. Hermione opened the door wider without making it a thing. By December, the 6 of them had progressed through the second and third year defense curriculum. Harry taught the practical components with the easy, instinctive authority of someone for whom magic was a native language, not a learned one. Hermione taught the theoretical underpinning. Ron taught tactics, which he framed as chess and they all understood was not chess. Neville, quietly and with increasing confidence, turned out to have a gift for defensive herbology, the use of magical plants in protective and offensive contexts, that had no formal curriculum but was theoretically rich and practically significant. Ginny had reflexes that were frankly alarming for an 11-year-old and she used them with the cheerful unconcern of someone who didn't know they were alarming. It was during one of these sessions that the issue of the Chamber of Secrets became real. It had been building since October, the whispers in the walls, the first petrification, Mrs. Norris found on Halloween with the message on the corridor wall. The Chamber of Secrets has been opened. Enemies of the air, beware. The school had gone into the particular anxiety of an institution that has encountered something it can't categorize. Hermione had been reading about the chamber since first year, with the specific attention of someone who thinks forewarned is forearmed, and she had a theory. She laid it out in the room of requirement on a Thursday evening in November, on the chalkboard she'd requested, with the map she'd drawn of Hogwarts' plumbing infrastructure. Salazar Slytherin's monster is a basilisk, she said. The evidence is consistent, the petrifications rather than deaths, which means the victims are seeing the basilisk indirectly, reflected surfaces, through a camera lens, through a ghost. The deaths have been prevented by accident rather than design, and the method of movement through the school is the pipes. A basilisk can travel through pipes at this size if they're sufficiently old. The Hogwarts plumbing predates the standard width regulations of 1732. That's a lot of plumbing knowledge, Fred said. I like infrastructure, Hermione said. The chamber entrance, Neville said, studying the map. Where is it? The girls' bathroom on the second floor, Hermione said. Moaning Myrtle's bathroom. I've been checking the pipes for traces of basilisk passage for 3 weeks. Ron looked at her. You've been checking pipes. The residue is distinctive if you know the markers. It shows up under a simple detection charm as a particular type of shed scale fragment. She paused. I've also been working on how to face a basilisk without dying, which is the more pressing question. Mirrors, Harry said. Exactly. The basilisk kills with direct eye contact. Reflected eye contact causes petrification, not death. So if we can force the basilisk to see its own reflection, it petrifieth itself, Ginny said, which she delivered in the dry tone she'd been developing, and George said, she's already funnier than you, Ron, and Ron said, she's always been funnier than me. The plan developed over 2 more sessions. By December, they had it complete. The question was the heir, who was opening the chamber, who was controlling the basilisk, and that answer came not from research but from Harry, who said one morning at breakfast, it's the diary. She looked at him. We destroyed the diary, he said, but the diary was used before we got to it. In first year. We know Lucius had it. He gave it to someone, or it was taken. The timeline means it could have been in someone's possession for months before the inspection. She had the realization at the same moment he did. Ginny. She bought her school things second-hand, Harry said, quietly enough that the table around them caught nothing. Used books. Ron mentioned it, that his family, that it was tight financially that year. If Lucius put the diary in a pile of second-hand Hogwarts books, he'd have known a Weasley would buy them, Hermione said. Because Arthur Weasley is the one who inspects his house. He was targeting Arthur through Ginny. She felt the cold clarity of it. We destroyed the Horcrux but not before someone was possessed. Ginny's been writing in a diary that writes back. They went to McGonagall that morning. McGonagall listened. Her expression tightened in increments as the picture assembled itself. When Hermione finished, she said, "Ginevra Weasley." "She doesn't know," Harry said immediately. "She's being used." The diary, whatever was left of the Horcrux after August, even without the full fragment, it was enough to possess her. 12-year-olds aren't equipped to recognize that kind of manipulation. "You need to get the diary," McGonagall said. "And you need to get Ginny out of the chamber before the possession advances further." "We know where the chamber is," Hermione said. "And we know how to face what's in it." They went on a Saturday morning, not in secret. McGonagall knew. Dumbledore had been notified via a letter sent before they left, and the school had been evacuated of students from the relevant corridors by a creative story involving a Peeves-related emergency that Fred and George had engineered with remarkable speed when asked. Harry opened the chamber entrance, the sink in Myrtle's bathroom, which responded to Parseltongue, the snake language he'd had since childhood and never fully understood, and which he spoke with the quiet ease of someone using a skill that had always felt native. The sink dropped away into a dark passage and Harry looked at it and looked at Hermione and said, "Mirrors." She held up the compact mirror she'd transfigured that morning into something sturdier. Mirrors. The chamber was ancient and cold and long, the kind of architecture that had stopped caring about human comfort several centuries back. Stone serpents lined the walls and green-tinged light came from somewhere sourceless. Ginny was on the floor at the far end, pale and still, and the shape standing over her was not Ginny's 12-year-old shape. It was a boy. Tall, dark-haired, perhaps 16, with the specific handsome quality of someone who had constructed his appearance with care, and the expression of a person who had been waiting a long time and had the patience of someone certain they would win. "Tom Riddle," Harry said. Riddle turned. He was holding a wand, Ginny's, and he looked at Harry with the measuring attention of someone who had been studying him from the inside of a diary for months. "Harry Potter," he said. His voice was smooth and full of the particular confidence of someone who had not yet encountered something they couldn't handle. "I've been looking forward to this." "I know," Harry said. "You've had a lot of time to think about it. I understand the appeal." Riddle blinked. "You're not afraid." "Should I be?" "You're 12 years old and you're a memory," Harry said. "You're less than a ghost. You're what's left when someone tries so hard to avoid dying that they forget what living was for." He looked at Riddle with the specific quality of someone who has read the full report and doesn't find the subject impressive. "And you've been feeding on an 11-year-old girl, which is elegant," Riddle said. "Pathetic," Harry said. "She's 11. Riddle's composure flickered. He raised Ginny's wand. What happened next was not neat or cinematic or arranged to look good. It was functional. Harry moved right as the spell came and it hit the wall. Hermione moved left and got to Ginny in 3 steps, checked her pulse, present, shallow, improving with distance from the memory Riddle, and kept the mirror angled. The basilisk came through the water at the chamber's end, responding to Riddle's command, enormous and ancient and genuinely terrifying in the absolute peripheral sense she was allowing herself, because looking was not an option. Harry's eyes were closed. Not from fear, she knew that. He'd closed them specifically, navigating by sound and by the bond, which gave him a sense of where she was and therefore where the basilisk wasn't. He moved in the chamber by the low directional awareness of their shared sense of space, and she watched with the mirror, tracking the reflection, and she said, "Left, 12 o'clock, now." Harry raised his wand. "Speculum perpetuum," she said, the spell she'd constructed from theory, from the basilisk's own mythology, and the basilisk turned because something in its visual field moved, and it saw itself. The sound it made was subterranean and enormous. The petrification worked on itself the same way it worked on any living thing, it was recursive, which was the beautiful bitter logic of it, and the basilisk froze in sections, vast and permanent, the stone spreading up from its tail as it tried and failed to look away from its own image. She walked to Riddle. He was watching the basilisk and his composure had become something raw and genuine. For just a moment he looked like what he was, not a Dark Lord, not a monster, but a 16-year-old boy in the final seconds of whatever borrowed existence he'd stolen, looking at something he had not predicted. "You didn't think it would be this simple," she said. He looked at her. "Nothing about you is simple." "No." She held up Ginny's diary. She'd found it beside Ginny's hand, fallen there. "This is finished." "You already destroyed it," he said. "You destroyed the fragment months ago." "Yes," she said. "This is just the echo of it. And you," she looked at him steadily, "are just the echo of an echo." She opened the compact mirror and held it up between them. Riddle looked at his own reflection. He looked at it for 2 full seconds. Then he was gone. No drama. No final speech. Just absence, like a candle going out. Ginny woke up on the chamber floor 6 minutes later, gasping, sitting upright, eyes wide. She looked around the chamber, the basilisk, stone, enormous, taking up most of the length of the room, Harry standing with his wand still raised, Hermione crouched beside her. Ginny said. There was a diary, we know," Hermione said. "You're all right." "I couldn't stop, it was like watching myself but I wasn't, we know," Hermione said again. "It wasn't you. The diary was put in your things without your knowledge." She looked at Ginny directly. "You are not responsible for anything that happened. Not for Myrtle, not for the cat, not for any of it. You were targeted deliberately by an adult who used you as a weapon, and that is entirely his fault, not yours." Ginny stared at her. Her eyes were very bright. "Can you walk?" Harry asked. "Yeah," Ginny said, and stood straight, and was 12 years old and had just survived possession by a piece of Voldemort's soul and was choosing to stand up, and Harry offered a hand and she took it and didn't make anything of it because that was the right response and she was, for all the difficulty of her year, a Weasley, and Weasleys were apparently constitutionally inclined toward getting up. The aftermath was considerable. Lucius Malfoy arrived at Hogwarts the following Monday with 4 other governors and the stated intention of removing Dumbledore from the school as a confidence issue. He arrived with the specific polished certainty of a man who has 4 governors and a legal framework and believes that to be sufficient. He encountered Dumbledore in the Great Hall, which Dumbledore had been using as a meeting space, which meant the encounter was also witnessed by approximately 200 students, Harry and Hermione among them. Lucius made his case. Eloquently, she had to give him that, he had the gift of formal speech, the kind that seemed more reasonable the faster it moved. The school was unsafe. The headmaster had failed in his protective duty. The board had convened and the vote was clear. Dumbledore listened. Then he said, "Lucius, before we continue, would you like to tell the assembled school why a diary in your possession was found in a first-year student's school bag at the start of this academic year?" Silence. Lucius's composure did not crack. It was too good for that. But it became, fractionally, more fixed. "I don't know what diary you're referring to. The Hogwarts governors in this room might find the item description familiar," Hermione said, from her seat at the table, clear and carrying. She had her notebook open. A small black diary, circa 1943, containing a preserved memory of Tom Marvolo Riddle. Classified as a Class 1 dangerous artifact under the Restricted Objects Act. Your property until it was confiscated during a standard ministry inspection in August. She looked at him. The inspection you were aware of, because your house elf mentioned it to the Weasley children at their home in June. Which was weeks before it happened. The governors were looking at Lucius. Lucius was looking at Hermione with the particular attention of a man recalibrating a threat assessment in real time. "You arranged for the diary to be removed during the inspection," she said, "so that it would be found in Muggle artifact channels rather than associated with you. But the removal was arranged by you. The inspection was a decoy. And the diary ended up in a first-year student's possessions, was used to open the Chamber of Secrets, nearly killed that student, and petrified 8 people." She closed the notebook. We have the diary's remains. We have the inspection report. We have the testimony of the student involved. And we have the testimony of the house elf who witnessed the diary being placed in second-hand school materials at Borgin and Burke's. Dobby, Harry said, from beside her. His name is Dobby. He's been trying to warn people about this all year. Lucius's eyes moved from Hermione to Harry with the cold deliberate motion of something that does not hurry because it does not need to. You are 12 years old, he said. Yes, Harry said. And I'm telling you, right now, in front of everyone in this room, that we will be pursuing every legal avenue available regarding your use of a Horcrux as a political weapon inside a school. He held Lucius's gaze with the same level, unimpressed attention he'd developed at 6 years old for adults who tried to relocate him. Whatever you're planning to say next, I'd think carefully about it first. Lucius said nothing. He left within the hour. The 4 governors who'd arrived with him were noticeably less unified as a group on the way out. 2 of them stopped to speak with Dumbledore privately. 3 weeks later, Lucius Malfoy was removed from the school governing board pending a ministry ethics investigation. The investigation was handled by a department that Arthur Weasley did not work in, but that Arthur Weasley knew people in, and that Patricia Hale, the Granger family solicitor, had prepared a 40-page preliminary document for. The second Horcrux was destroyed in February. Not the diary, they'd already handled that, but the ring, which Dumbledore had been investigating quietly all year and which was now, with Hermione's full theoretical framework for Horcrux identification and her annotated copy of Secrets of the Darkest Art, something they could approach with a methodology rather than a guess. Dumbledore found the ring in the Gaunt shack in March. He came back from that trip with a damaged hand that he hadn't had when he left. He sat with Harry and Hermione in his office and showed them the hand, which was black from fingertip to wrist, with the particular color of something cursed deeply. You put it on, Harry said. Dumbledore was quiet for a moment. I recognized it, he said. It belonged to my family, long ago. There is a stone set in it, a deathly hallow, Hermione said. She'd been reading about them since January, when the symbol had appeared in 3 separate sources and she triangulated the reference. The Resurrection Stone. Dumbledore looked at her with the expression she'd been seeing more of this year, genuine, uncomplicated surprise. Yes. You wanted to use it, Harry said. Not an accusation. An observation. There are people I would have spoken to, Dumbledore said quietly. Mistakes I would have asked to revisit. But the ring has a killing curse embedded in it, Hermione said. Designed to activate on contact. It's moving toward your heart. I need to look at it. Dumbledore blinked. You need to, she was already out of her chair. She examined the hand with the focused precision of someone running a diagnostic, her wand tip moving over the blackened skin, reading the curse's structure. It was deeply set, powerfully constructed, Voldemort's own work, the most elegant and the most vicious thing she'd yet encountered. She spent 4 minutes looking at it before she spoke. I can slow it, she said. Not stop it permanently, the curse is too well constructed for a complete counter, the way it's threaded into the cellular structure, but I can contain it. Keep it from spreading. She looked at Dumbledore. It will still be there. You'll need regular treatment. And you have, I'd estimate 12 to 18 months if we start immediately. Dumbledore looked at her. You're 12. I'm nearly 13, she said. And I've been reading curse theory since August because I knew we'd encounter Voldemort's work sooner or later and I wanted to be prepared. She held his gaze. Do you want me to try or not? He said yes. The treatment took 25 minutes. Harry sat across the office and watched, and the bond between them was steady and present through it. She could feel him there, the warm groundedness of him, which helped her concentration rather than disrupting it. When she finished, the spread of the black had stopped at the wrist joint, contained behind a layered ward of her own construction. Dumbledore looked at his hand. He looked at her. Thank you, he said. Thank me by telling us what we don't know yet, she said, sitting back. The full list of Horcruxes. Everything you've theorized. No more managed doses of information. He told them. All of it, every object he suspected, every memory he'd gathered over 40 years of thinking about Tom Riddle. The locket, the cup, the diadem, the snake nogginy, and the one he didn't say aloud but which Harry said for him, quiet and flat. And me. Silence. I'm one, Harry said. Aren't I? Dumbledore looked at him with the complicated gravity of a man who has been carrying this knowledge for years and has been dreading this moment and is also, she thought, profoundly relieved it had come. Yes, he said. The night your parents died, the rebounding curse created, unintentionally, it was an accident of the spell's failure, not a deliberate act, a fragment was anchored to you. Harry received this the way he received hard truths, without the face cracking, without the performance of collapse, just the still absorption of someone processing something real. She watched him and felt through the bond the shape of what it was costing him to hold that still. Can it be removed? He asked. I believe so, Hermione said, before Dumbledore could answer. Both of them looked at her. I've been working on the theory since last year. A Horcrux in a living host is different from one in an object. The fragment doesn't have the same anchoring mechanism, because a living magical core is not static the way an object is. It shifts. It responds. She looked at Harry. Your core responds. And it's been doing something to the fragment all along, the bond has been doing something. The confluentia changes the dynamic because the fragment isn't just in your core, it's in the space where both our cores meet. And that's my working space. Harry looked at her. He was very still. I think I can extract it, she said. Not now, I'm not ready, the theory isn't complete. But I'm working on it. How long? I need until summer at least. Maybe longer. I want to be certain before we attempt it. He held her gaze for a long moment. Then, okay. Okay? I trust your work, he said simply. I'll wait. Dumbledore looked at both of them across the desk with the expression that had been slowly becoming his default expression when he looked at them, the one she'd identified in September as the look of a man who has been carrying a weight alone and has finally found people who can help hold it. Outside the window, spring was breaking through, the grounds turning green, the lake reflecting a paler sky. Somewhere in the castle, the room of requirement was ready and waiting, and there were 4 Horcruxes still unaddressed, and Voldemort was reconstituting, and the wizarding world was a set of institutions that had spent a year trying to categorize 2 12-year-olds and mostly failing. But Lucius Malfoy was off the school board. The diary was ash. The ring's curse was contained. Ginny Weasley was whole, and getting stronger, and had shown up to the room of requirement session after her recovery with her chin up and a look in her eyes that said "Try me," which Hermione had found genuinely moving. And Harry Potter, who had been left in a cupboard under a staircase for 5 years and had learned to take up no space and want for nothing and expect less than that, was sitting in Dumbledore's office saying "I trust your work" without flinching, with the ease of someone who had learned what it felt like to be held. That was not nothing. That was, in fact, everything. Chapter 6, The Unbreakable. Name. The Dementors arrived at Hogwarts in September. Not as an attack, as a deployment. The Ministry had arranged it with Dumbledore's reluctant agreement, the official reason being security against one Sirius Black, escaped from Azkaban, the first person to ever do so, the man the papers were calling the most dangerous criminal alive. Hermione had read every article printed about the escape and had started, within a week, to find the shape of something wrong in it. She said so on the Hogwarts Express, 3rd year, the 6 of them in a compartment they'd claimed by mutual understanding, with the addition of a 7th, a sleeping professor in the corner whose worn briefcase said R.J. Lupin and who had the particular exhausted look of someone carrying more than tiredness. The coverage, she said, with her newspaper clipping spread on the seat beside her, never actually specifies the crime Sirius Black committed. It says he betrayed the Potters. It says he killed 12 Muggles and Peter Pettigrew. But there's no trial record. I've checked the public ministry archive. Ron looked up from his chocolate frogs. What do you mean, no trial record? I mean there's no record of a trial, she said. Sirius Black was imprisoned in Azkaban in November 1981. The trials for captured Death Eaters began in December 1981. His name doesn't appear in any of them. Harry hadn't moved. He'd been looking out the window since she started talking, at the increasingly gray landscape as they moved north, and she'd felt through the bond the quality of his attention, still, absorbing, running the logic. He was never tried, Harry said. That I can find, no. Which means either the records were suppressed, or there are no records because there was no trial, she said. Which means Sirius Black has been in Azkaban for 12 years without ever being given the opportunity to argue his innocence. The compartment was quiet for a moment. The sleeping professor shifted slightly but didn't wake. He was my parents' friend, Harry said. James and Lily's. Their secret keeper. Yes. And he turned them in to Voldemort. That's what the official account says, Hermione said carefully. That's what Dumbledore believes. But Dumbledore believed it on the basis of the circumstances immediately after. Sirius was found at the scene, Peter Pettigrew was dead, 12 Muggles were dead. No one thought to question the sequence of events because the war had just ended and there was relief to process and an assumption that the obvious conclusion was the correct one. What's your theory? Ron asked. The secret keeper, she said. If Sirius was the secret keeper, he couldn't have told anyone, not voluntarily, without consequences that would have been immediately visible. A Fidelius charm doesn't allow partial betrayal. If he'd told Voldemort, the magic should have left evidence. She paused. But what if he wasn't the secret keeper? Harry turned from the window. What if they switched? If they were going to switch, they'd have switched to someone unexpected, Hermione said. Someone no one would think to look at. Someone completely unassuming. Peter Pettigrew, Harry said. Who is the only person in this scenario who's dead, she said. Conveniently. With no body. Only, what were the official reports? A finger. Another silence. He framed Sirius, Ron said slowly. And he faked his own death. That's my working theory, Hermione said. He was a Death Eater, Harry said. Not a question. The pieces were assembling in front of him with the clean forward motion she knew from his face. Almost certainly. Harry looked at the sleeping professor again. Then at his hands. She watched the thing moving through him, not grief exactly, more the particular anger of someone finding out that a lie they were never told was a lie, that their entire understanding of their parents' deaths was built on a version of events that served someone else's purposes. James and Lily Potter had not died because of Sirius Black. Sirius Black had spent 12 years in Azkaban for a crime committed by the man who actually gave the Potters' location to Voldemort. We find him, Harry said. Both of them, she said. Sirius first. If he's innocent, Ron said, why did he escape? Why not, work through the system, send letters, 12 years in Azkaban, Harry said. Have you read what Azkaban does to people, Ron? Ron had. He'd grown up with that knowledge, the particular chill that ran through wizarding families at the word. Yeah, he said quietly. All right. The professor woke when the train slowed before the Dementor checkpoint, coming awake with the alertness of someone who'd learned to sleep lightly. He looked around the compartment quickly, assessing, she noted, threat patterns, and then, meeting Hermione's eyes, understood that she'd been watching him wake up and was not alarmed by it. Professor Lupin, she said. He blinked. You know who I am. Your briefcase, she said. And I read the staff announcement in the Hogwarts circular that the defense position had been filled. We've been needing a competent defense teacher for 2 years. He looked at her. He looked at Harry. Something in his expression shifted. She'd seen this before, with people who knew Harry's parents, that involuntary reaction to the face that was not James's but had James's structure, that carried Lily's eyes. He controlled it professionally, but she saw it. "You're Harry," he said. "Yes," Harry said. "I'm Remus Lupin." "I was a friend of my parents," Harry said. "Yes. We've been hoping we'd get a chance to talk." Lupin looked at Harry for a moment with the expression of a man encountering something he'd been bracing for years and finding it different from what he expected. "Have you?" he said. The Dementors hit the train like cold through glass. The lights went out and the temperature dropped, and the darkness had a quality that was not ordinary darkness. It had the specific weight of every bad memory demanding to be felt again, the past insisting on itself, and Hermione felt the edges of it, the cold reaching for the worst things she'd stored, the fear and the uncertainty and the small particular grief of being strange and lonely before Harry. She pushed back against it with the focused deliberateness she brought to most things. Harry made a sound. Not loud. Just a sharp intake of breath, and she reached for his wrist in the dark, the same grip, she realized, as the park, 4 years ago, and the warmth was the same, and said, "Here," and he gripped back hard. The Dementor passed. The lights came back. Several students in adjacent compartments were heard crying or being sick. Lupin was already producing chocolate from somewhere. He'd had it ready, she noted, which told her he'd known what this would feel like and had prepared, and handing it around with the practiced efficiency of someone who had personal experience with Dementors beyond the professional. Harry ate the chocolate and sat for a moment, breathing. "Then, I heard my mother," he said, quietly. "When it came near. Screaming." Lupin went very still. "I've heard it before," Harry said. "When it was close enough. I didn't know what it was until now." He looked at Lupin. She was trying to get him, to take her instead. Lupin's face was doing something careful and controlled that cost him considerable effort. "Yes," he said. Yes. That's what she did." "She must have been very brave," Harry said. "She was the bravest person I knew," Lupin said, "and I knew some extraordinarily brave people." They looked at each other across the compartment, Harry and Lupin, and something passed between them that was not words, the particular frequency of shared grief, the loss of the same people approached from different angles. Hermione let go of Harry's wrist gradually and he let her, and she took note of several things: the way Harry looked after the Dementor, not shaken but resolved, the way Lupin watched him with the intensity of someone recognizing something they'd been afraid was lost, and the way the chocolate's effect moved through the compartment and Ron had already given half his to Ginny and was claiming he didn't need it, which Hermione knew was untrue and which Ron knew she knew, and neither of them made an issue of. Neville was holding his piece of chocolate in both hands and looking at the door the Dementor had tried to open and then, with the deliberate motion of someone choosing to move forward, eating it. Lupin's first defense lesson was, within 6 minutes, the best defense lesson any of them had ever had. He understood the subject from the inside out, which was different from academic mastery. He knew what it felt like to face these things, and that knowledge changed the way he taught. He introduced the boggart with the dry wit of someone who had spent years with difficult material and found that humor was the only sensible framework. When Harry faced the boggart, which should have been Voldemort by ordinary predictive logic, which would have alarmed the class, it took the shape of a Dementor. The class went still. Harry looked at it. Then the boggart Dementor deflated like a balloon and Lockhart in woman's clothes stood in its place, because Harry had apparently chosen the most absurd thing he could think of, and the class dissolved. Hermione watched Lupin watching Harry and read the calculation happening behind his eyes. This boy had chosen not to let the class see his worst fear. Not because he was hiding it, but because he'd decided what the class needed was laughter, and had acted accordingly. Lupin understood this, she could tell. The slight nod he gave when Harry stepped back told her he'd clocked exactly what Harry had done and why. She was going to like this professor. She told Lupin about their serious black theory in October. Not because the timing was perfect but because she'd been working on it for a month and she needed either confirmation or a significant counterargument, and Lupin was the only person at Hogwarts who had the personal knowledge to provide either. She went to his office alone, without Harry, which Harry had been mildly resistant to, and she'd explained, Lupin was carrying a personal history with this. He'd be managing emotions. He'd manage them better one-on-one than in company, and she could handle the information and bring it back cleanly. Harry had said, "You don't need me to be your backup." "I know," she said. "That's not why I mentioned it." "Then why?" "Because if I'm right about Sirius Black, you're going to want to be sitting down when you hear it from someone who knew your parents," she said. "And I'd rather it happened here than in a professor's office." He'd looked at her for a long moment. Then, "Yeah. Okay." Lupin's office was warm and slightly chaotic, which suited him. He had a Grindylow in a tank in the corner that he was clearly fond of, and books in the organized disorder of someone who used them constantly, and a kettle that had already started when she knocked, which suggested either precognition or a very responsive magical home environment. She laid out her theory. He listened without interrupting, which she appreciated, and she watched his face do several things: surprise, pain, the old particular guilt of a survivor who has made peace with something and then finds out the peace was built on false ground, and under all of that, an enormous, suppressed, terrifying hope. When she finished, Lupin was quiet for a long time. "You're right," he said. She waited. "I knew it was wrong," he said. "At the time. I was not in a good state in 1981, there was a full moon 3 days after Lily and James died, and I was not, anyway." He stopped. "I thought it was grief. Making me suspicious of the obvious explanation. Because I couldn't believe Sirius would." He stopped again. "I should have pushed harder. I should have asked the questions." "You couldn't have known," she said. "I've had 12 years to ask," he said. "I didn't." "Where is Peter Pettigrew?" she asked. Lupin looked at her. The question had a very specific quality, and she watched him receive it and understand what it meant, that she was already past if and at where. "Peter was an animagus," Lupin said slowly. "Unregistered. His form was a rat." "A beat." "A rat," she said. "A small gray rat. He had a missing toe on his right paw, right front. He lost it in the apparent explosion. I assume he cut it off himself to leave a physical trace. To make the death convincing." "A small gray rat with a missing toe on his right front paw," Hermione repeated. "Kept as a pet by a wizarding family. Since 1981. Lupin looked at her with the expression of a man watching a sequence of dominoes he should have seen coming. "Ron's rat," she said. "Scabbers." She brought Harry and Ron together that evening. Ron took it the way Ron took hard things, with a silence that lasted 4 minutes, which for Ron was tectonic, and then a look on his face that was not hurt but fury, the specific fury of someone who has been keeping a monster in his pocket for 12 years without knowing. "He's been in my room," Ron said. "Yes," Hermione said. "He's slept in my bed." Ron stood up. "Where is he now?" "Your dormitory," Harry said. "Don't go yet. We need a plan." "The plan is I go get him." "The plan," Harry said, with the quality of voice he used when the situation required forward thinking rather than forward movement, "is that we catch him in a way that can't be denied. If we just produce a rat and say he's a Death Eater and no one's ever heard of animagus Peter Pettigrew in that form, it becomes a 13-year-old's word against the official account. And the official account sent Sirius Black to Azkaban on no evidence at all. We need witnesses. We need Lupin. We need the transformation to happen in front of people who can't deny it." Ron looked at him. The fury was still present, but his thinking had come back in. "Tonight? We need to get to Sirius first," Hermione said. "He came to Hogwarts to find Peter. He knows. He's been operating on that knowledge for 12 years. The immediate question was how Sirius had been getting into the castle, which became clear when Lupin, brought into the full conversation that evening, explained the Marauder's map, which Hermione had heard of from Fred and George's passing reference in second year and had been meaning to ask about. Lupin went quiet when she mentioned the map and then said, "Fred and George have it?" "Since whenever they nicked it from Filch," Harry said. "Of course they do," Lupin said, with the specific exhausted affection of someone who recognized a tradition. The map and its four creators, Moony, Wormtail, Padfoot, Prongs, rearranged several of Hermione's frameworks simultaneously. She sat with the information for approximately 40 seconds and then said, "Your father was an animagus." "Prongs." "A stag." Harry looked at her. "The Patronus charm," she said. "The form of a Patronus is connected to the caster's core. Yours is. I've theorized about what it would be, based on your core's signature." She stopped. This wasn't the moment for the theoretical digression. "You should try the charm." "Now?" "No. But soon. I think you'll find the form meaningful." Lupin looked between them with the expression he'd been developing all term, the one that said I have been inadequately prepared for how these two think, and said, "I'll teach you the Patronus. Both of you. This weekend." The Patronus lesson happened on a Saturday, in the room of requirement, which provided exactly what was needed without being asked: a large space, a single boggart in a box, and a warmth that was slightly higher than the castle standard, as though it was paying attention. She went first. Lupin watched with professional interest and she thought of the thing he'd said to focus, think of the happiest memory you have, the most powerful, and she thought of a park, and a wooden bench, and a book open in her lap, and a boy with his shoulders at the wrong angle, and the moment she'd stood up and walked forward. Not the magic that happened after. The decision to stand. The absolute, immediate refusal to see that and do nothing. The Patronus came out silver-white and large and ran a full circle of the room before settling. An otter. She looked at it. It looked at her with the bright, undimmed energy of something that had decided to exist and was very pleased about it. Harry went next. He held his wand and Lupin said, "Think of something happy, something that makes you feel." "I know what to think of," Harry said. He cast it. The stag was enormous and immediate, fully corporeal on the first attempt, and it ran the room the way all stags run, not fast, but with a power and purpose that was physical even in light, and it came to Harry and lowered its head, and Harry reached out and his hand passed through the silver flank, and his face did the thing it did when something reached him at the real level, not the managed surface level, but underneath that. Lupin made a sound. She looked at him. He had both hands over his mouth, and he was not crying, but something in his eyes had come apart and was being reassembled. "Prongs," Lupin said. Very quietly. Harry looked at him. "He's here," Lupin said. "In you." That's James." The stag dissolved slowly, the way patron uses do, reluctantly, as if staying would be preferable. Harry watched it go. "I know," he said. "I know he is." They caught Peter Pettigrew on a Thursday night, when the moon was waxing and the timing, per Lupin's knowledge of the lunar calendar, was not a full moon, which mattered because of something Hermione had worked out in October and confronted Lupin about directly: the regular disappearances, the particular exhaustion, the chocolate he always had to hand, the very specific care he took around certain days. He'd looked at her steadily when she raised it and said, "Yes. Just that." She'd said, "It doesn't change anything professionally, your condition is managed and your work is excellent." He'd been quiet for a moment and then thanked her in a voice that suggested not many people had said that to him. The moon was waxing but not full. They went 6, Harry, Hermione, Ron, Neville, Ginny, and Lupin himself, to Gryffindor dormitory where Scabbers had been hiding in Ron's bedding with the increasingly panicked energy, Ron reported, of a creature that knows it's been found out. Ron held the rat over the floor. The rat struggled. "Peter," Lupin said. "It's over." The rat went very still. And then, with the horrible fluidity of a transformation that had been held too long, the rat became a man, small, balding, watery-eyed, shaking in every extremity, standing in the middle of a Hogwarts dormitory 12 years after everyone had believed him dead. Peter Pettigrew looked at them. He looked at Lupin. He looked at Harry, and his eyes did something fast and frightened and calculating. "Harry," he said. "Harry, your father, James, he would have, mercy, he would have wanted, my father would have wanted his wife alive," Harry said. "And his best friend out of prison. So let's not use him as an argument for anything." Pettigrew's mouth opened. "You're going to transform back," Hermione said. "We have a binding charm ready. You're going to be turned over to the Ministry with Lupin's testimony and our written account and the Marauder's map which shows your name. The case for Sirius Black's innocence will be filed by our solicitor simultaneously, before you're transported, so that the cases are linked in the same documentation. You won't be able to disappear into Ministry custody without Sirius's case moving at the same time. And if you run," Harry said, "we will find you. There is nowhere in this country you can go that we don't have the resources and the inclination to reach." Pettigrew looked at Harry with the expression of a man encountering something he has no framework for. He had expected, she could see the shape of his expectation, a 13-year-old boy, maybe frightened, maybe angry, maybe susceptible to manipulation through the name of a dead father. He had not expected this. "The binding charm," she said to Harry. Harry cast it. Pettigrew didn't even try to run. Sirius Black was in the shrieking shack. They knew this because Lupin knew Sirius's patterns, the places he'd returned to, the geographical logic of a man who'd operated in Hogsmeade as a large black dog for 3 months without being identified. Hermione, Ron, and Lupin took Pettigrew directly to the Ministry contact Dumbledore had arranged, a senior Auror named Shacklebolt whom Dumbledore trusted, which Hermione had separately verified by checking his record, which was clean and long and entirely free of any connection to Malfoy's fear influence. Harry went to the shack with Neville and Ginny. She'd considered going herself. She'd spent approximately 4 minutes on the consideration before acknowledging that Harry needed to do this part without her, not because she couldn't help, but because some things were between specific people, and the first meeting of Harry Potter and his godfather was one of them. Harry hadn't said this. He didn't need to. She felt it through the bond, the low private quality of it, and she'd said, "Go. We'll handle Pettigrew." He'd looked at her. "Thank you. Tell me everything when you get back." "Every word." He went. She went. And the bond was a thread between them across the distance, the compass needle pointing, warm and steady. The shrieking shack, Harry told her afterward, sitting on the floor of the room of requirement at midnight with Neville and Ginny present and a plate of food from the kitchens that the house elves had provided with great enthusiasm when Hermione had explained someone needed feeding, was not what he'd expected. Sirius Black was a man who looked like 12 years of Azkaban, gaunt, grey-stubbled, with eyes that had the shadow of Dementors still behind them, but who was, underneath all of that, still recognizably himself. The man James and Lily had loved. The man who had driven a flying motorbike and hidden a baby with a letter that said take care of him and then gone after Peter Pettigrew alone, not to kill him but to confront him, and been outmaneuvered by someone who'd had the advantage of being willing to sacrifice innocent people. "He cried," Harry said, matter-of-factly. "When I walked in. He tried not to but he did. He said he was sorry. Not about being innocent, I think he's been over that so many times in 12 years that it's a fact for him now, not a wound. He was sorry for not being there." "What did you say?" Hermione asked. "I said I had good people around me." He paused. He looked at Neville and Ginny and sort of laughed. Said Neville Longbottom and Ginny Weasley, like he knew who they were from a list. Like he'd been keeping up. "He's been following you from outside," Ginny said. "That's a bit, he's my godfather," Harry said. "And he spent 12 years thinking about the one job he had and believed he failed at." Ginny was quiet. "He wants to be freed," Harry said. "Obviously. But he also, we talked for 3 hours. He told me things about my parents. Things I'd never," he stopped. She felt the weight of it through the bond, not grief exactly but the specific texture of receiving things that should always have been yours. He told me James used to make Lily laugh by conjuring tiny stags that danced, because she had a weakness for absurd things done with complete sincerity. He told me Lily once hexed a Slytherin 7th year so comprehensively that the kid's hair grew to the floor and couldn't be cut for a week, and she didn't feel bad about it because he'd had it coming for a year and a half. He smiled, the full one, the real one. He said I have her stubbornness. High praise, Hermione said. Yeah, Harry said. He meant it that way. Sirius Black's case moved through the Ministry in 3 weeks, which was historically unprecedented for a case involving Azkaban, and which happened because Patricia Hale had filed documentation in 4 concurrent departments simultaneously, with the full weight of Lupin's testimony, the physical presence of Peter Pettigrew in Ministry custody, and a subsidiary filing from Dumbledore that was, by any standard, nuclear in its scope. Hermione had reviewed every document before it was filed. She'd found 2 errors and 1 gap, fixed them, and written a covering summary that Hale had read once and adopted without amendment. The Wisengamot convened for the hearing on a Tuesday. Hermione was in the gallery with Harry and Lupin and the Weasleys, all of them, all 6 children and both parents, because the Weasleys responded to important events by showing up collectively. She had her notebook. She watched the Wisengamot members with the patient attention of someone identifying future variables. Lucius Malfoy was not present, having resigned his seat amid the ongoing ethics investigation. This was noted. Pettigrew testified. He did so with the visible reluctance of someone who had run out of angles and knew it, and under Veritaserum his account of what had actually happened in October 1981 was clean and unambiguous and damning. He confirmed the secret keeper switch. He confirmed his own Death Eater status. He confirmed that he had cut off his own finger, killed 12 Muggles with a single curse, and transformed to escape Sirius Black, who had been trying not to kill him but to capture him. Sirius Black was acquitted unanimously. She watched Harry watch this, and felt through the bond the way it moved through him, not explosion, not collapse, but something settling, a correction in the deep structure, the way a building settles after a foundation is fixed. This was not the same as having his parents back. Nothing was that. But it was one less lie, one less weight, one person freed from 12 years of wrong that had started on the same night everything else went wrong, and it was right, it was simply right, and Harry sat in the gallery with his hands loose in his lap and watched Sirius Black receive his freedom with the expression of someone who had decided this was enough of a good thing to carry without needing it to be more than it was. Sirius found them in the corridor outside afterward. He looked substantially better than the shack, cleaned up, the exhaustion still present but the eyes clearer, and he looked at Harry for a moment without speaking, and then he said, "I'd like to be in your life. If that's, I don't want to push. I know you have people." "I have people," Harry said. "You're one of them now." Sirius looked at him for a moment. Then he looked at Hermione, who had been standing beside Harry with her notebook closed, present but not inserting herself into it. "You're the one who built the case," he said. "I had significant help," she said. "She basically did it alone," Ron said, from behind her. "But she won't say that, so I will." "Not alone," she said, firm. "She's like this about credit," Neville said. "I know people like that," Sirius said. His eyes were on Hermione with the particular attention of someone recognizing a type they'd loved before. Lily was like that. She'd do something extraordinary and then explain in detail why it was a team effort. Hermione didn't know what to say to that, which was unusual. She said, "Thank you," which felt insufficient, and Sirius seemed to understand that she meant it fully. They walked out of the Ministry into the grey London afternoon, all of them together, Harry and Sirius side by side in front, Hermione and Lupin slightly behind, Ron and Neville and Ginny in a loose cluster with Arthur and Molly Weasley bringing up the rear with the warm exhausted energy of people who had been braced for something going wrong and were still processing that it hadn't. Hermione walked and felt the bond between her and Harry the way she always felt it, the compass needle, the candle, the low warm constant of it. 3 years old now, this particular version of it. 7 years old if you counted from the park, from the wooden bench, from standing up. She thought about what she'd told Harry in the common room at the end of first year. Don't be small. The instruction had been directed at him, but she'd needed it too. She understood that now. She'd spent her whole life being the wrong kind of visible, too much in the ways no one wanted and too little in the ways that mattered, and the bond had changed that too. Harry saw her fully and she saw him fully, and neither of them had ever once tried to make the other smaller for convenience. She thought about the Horcrux in Harry's core. The fragment she'd been building a framework to remove since second year. She had it now, the complete theory, the methodology, the necessary spell architecture. She'd finished it in June and run it by Dumbledore, who had read it for 2 hours and then said, with the tone of a man encountering something that exceeded his preparation, this might actually work. It was the last thing. Or the last first stage thing. There were still Horcruxes to find and destroy, still Voldemort reconstituting somewhere, still the war that had paused and would eventually unpause. But the fragment in Harry was the most urgent piece because it was the piece most available to Voldemort, the thread he might eventually use to reach back in. She would deal with it this summer. She and Harry together, in the study on Heather Drive, with the chalkboard and the books and the 4-year foundation of her best theoretical work, and she'd spent weeks being certain she was ready, and she knew the difference between confident and certain, and she was the latter. Harry fell back beside her on the ministry steps. Thinking loudly, he said. You can feel that? I can feel the quality of it, he said. Like a storm that's not happening yet, but you can smell the rain. She looked at him. The procedure. This summer. I know, he said. He wasn't alarmed. He hadn't been alarmed about it since she'd first told him she was working on it, which she had always been grateful for and never taken for granted. You're ready? Yes. He nodded. Then we do it. It will be, I need to be very precise, and you'll need to hold absolutely still at the core level, which means you'll need to trust the process when it feels like, Hermione, he said. Yes? I trust you, he said. That's not a complicated thing for me. I've trusted you since a park in Surrey when I was 6 and you walked past an adult like they didn't exist. He looked at her with the green eyes that still had their particular quality of full attention, the quality she'd noticed first in the park, underneath the exhaustion, and which had grown clearer every year as the exhaustion receded and left what was always there. I'll hold still. She looked at him. He looked back. Above them, the London sky was moving toward evening, and the ministry building behind them was full of people who spent their days deciding how the wizarding world should work, many of them badly, and ahead of them was a 4th year and whatever it would bring, and the remaining Horcruxes and the war they were building themselves to face, and none of it was simple and none of it was safe. But Harry Potter, who had been taught to be nothing, was standing on ministry steps in the grey autumn light, choosing everything. And she had walked beside him, step for step, for 7 years, and she intended to keep walking. Come on, she said. Where are we going? To tell your godfather about our summer plans, she said. Because he's going to want to be there and he should be asked. Harry smiled, the full one, the real one, the one she'd been watching develop from a flicker at the corner of his mouth into something that took over his whole face, and which had become one of the fixed points in her working model of the world, something that would be there when she needed it. They walked back to the group together. Behind them, deep in the ministry building, in the Department of Mysteries, the room that had registered an anomaly of the first classification 7 years ago was still quietly running. The file on the Confluentia in Surrey had grown, over 7 years, to 47 pages. The latest entry, added that morning by the same anonymous hand that had been adding to it since the beginning, said simply, "The bond is complete." Below that, in the second hand, "What does it make them?" Below that, in the third, "Ask them in 10 years." Something the world doesn't have a name for yet. And below that, in a fourth hand that had never appeared before, cramped and quick and certain, "No. Ask them now. They'll tell you themselves." The pages settled. The file closed. The room kept its records. Outside, two 13-year-olds walked into the London evening with a freedman and a werewolf professor and 5 Weasleys and a family they had built from the ground up, from the moment one of them had chosen to stand, and the magic between them was warm and constant and old, and it did not need to announce itself. It simply was. Which was, in the language of the oldest magic, the most permanent word of all.